Chapter 245. After being reminded by my readers, I found out that I had written 239 chapters, which is why I wrote the 42 chapters yesterday. It was a bit embarrassing. Most of the places in Chaotian were in the mood of spring, but White Town had just passed its winter. The pear blossoms in the city turned white. Guodong returned to the old temple. The huge broadsword as big as a house beam was still as silent as before, and the golden Buddha was still smiling while looking at the world outside the temple and the distant snowland. She walked to the front of the Buddha's statue and took a bite of fruit. Then she returned to the doorsill and sat down. Looking at the snowland where the fog had dispersed, she asked a question. Don't you feel bored looking at the same scenery every day? I don't want this world to be bored like this. Lately, there have been many movements in Chaotian. It's quite lively, but it makes me feel uneasy. The deep and distant voice rang out, sounding a bit broken, which sounded like the famous broken bell in the Guocheng temple. Guodong arched her eyebrows and said, "This matter has nothing to do with me. I don't even know where they got the list." The voice asked, "Do you think you can catch all of Bulo Lin this time?" "Of course it's impossible," Guodong said without hesitation. "What about that person?" the voice asked again. After a moment of silence, Guodong said, "It's very difficult. Even if Jian Shalai is forced to show up, he won't leave any evidence behind, and it's not easy to kill him." "Do you want to kill him?" asked the voice. Guodong threw away the fruit in her hand and stood up, saying, "Even if I want to kill him, I don't need you to do it." The rain was common in the late spring. The spring rain in Zhaoga City had been falling for a day and a night, and it looked like it would continue. The rain was not heavy, but the pattern was a bit annoying, especially when the smooth green stone slabs became wet, making it easy for people to slip and fall. The black eaves of Taichung Temple looked more like the horns of an old dragon in the rain, as if a pair of eyes were watching the pedestrians taking shelter from the rain and the children who fell on the street, as if they were laughing at someone. In a house not far from Taichung Temple, the Jing family was having dinner. Jing Shang, his father and his wife were discussing the matter of his child studying at the provincial school, and then they talked about his child's marriage. Back then, the child who couldn't even walk steadily and needed to be carried by Jingjio was now 11 or 12 years old. He was eating with his head lowered, looking very obedient. In the public house, which was not far from the Jing residence, the rain gently knocked on the windows, blurring the spring scenery in the courtyard. The sunlight scattered, making the roux kiln vase on the shelf look even more beautiful. Duke Lu withdrew his gaze from the bottle and looked at his son, saying, "Something might happen in the next few days. Don't leave the mansion." Crown Prince Lu Ming asked curiously, "Father, what is it?" Duke Lu was silent for a while, then said, "Something very interesting. Bulo Lin wants to kill me." Hearing this news, Lu Ming was very surprised. He thought that his father was deeply trusted by His Majesty the Emperor and could enter and leave the palace at will. However, he had always been low-key and rarely offended people. Why would he become the target of Bulo Lin? Before his shock subsided, it turned into worry. He knew very well what a terrifying place Bulo Lin was. Even if his father had a high position and was protected by strong people, when he went in and out, how could he defend himself for a lifetime? Bulo Lin indeed rarely fails, but since we know in advance, we naturally don't need to worry. Duke Lu looked at his son's expression and knew what he was thinking. He said, "This matter should be over soon and won't last for too long." Lu Ming didn't understand the meaning of this sentence, but he was slightly relieved. He asked, "Why does Bulo Lin want to kill you?" Duke Lu said, "I don't think it's because someone wants to buy my life, so it naturally has something to do with my position as a father." Lu Ming was even more puzzled. He thought that his father was the chief of Taichung Temple. What could this position have to do with an assassin organization like Bulo Lin? Duke Lu got up before dawn. In the past, he had often asked for leave, but these days he had suddenly become diligent and attended court every day. Standing at the city gate, he chatted and joked with the officials. It seemed very normal. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking or what he was waiting for. By the time he left the imperial palace, the morning light had already arrived. The rain falling on a long street was illuminated by the light and was very beautiful. Looking at the scenery outside the window, Duke Lu frowned. He wondered why the other party hadn't made a move yet. Arriving in front of Taichung Temple, Duke Lu got off the sedan chair and looked at the black eaves in the rain. Thinking of something, he smiled and shook his head. The officials came up to greet him, and he responded with a gentle expression. Surrounded by his subordinates, he entered Taichung Temple and came to the innermost room. The room was very warm and dry. The water droplets on his official robes and sideburns quickly disappeared. He sighed comfortably and picked up the teacup by his hand. Every morning when he came to the yamen, a cup of hot tea would be prepared, and it would be at the most convenient place for him to pick it up. It had been many years, and the attendants in the tea house had done these things very well. For example, today's cup was light red shanmei tea, which was his favorite tea in spring. As for other seasons, there would be different preferences. The temperature of the tea in the cup was also very particular. It was neither hot nor cold, and it was the temperature that he liked the most. Normally, he would have taken a sip of tea by now, but today he held the cup and did not drink. He seemed to be in a daze, and no one knew what he was thinking. Suddenly, there was a noise in the distance, mixed with a few exclamations. Duke Lu was still looking at the shanmei tea in the cup, his expression unchanged. Dense footsteps could be heard as many people came to his room. A man dressed as a servant was pushed to the ground. Someone reported, "Duke, this person is the attendant of the tea house, surnamed Zhou. He was the one who poisoned the tea." Duke Lu did not even look up and asked, "Did you find the residual poison? What kind of poison was it?" This person is very cautious. He threw the poison packet into the kitchen after poisoning the tea. I couldn't stop him, so I had to test the poison in the tea later. Judging from the official uniform, the official who replied was not a subordinate of Taichung Temple, but an official of the Pure Heaven Bureau. Duke Lu lifted his head and put the cup back on the table gently. Looking at the attendant on the ground, he narrowed his eyes. Bulolin's assassin was not a cultivation swordsman who was good at assassination, but a servant who had worked at Taichung Temple for many years. If he had not known about this beforehand, he would have drunk the tea in the cup today. The common poisons were not of much use to someone like him, but since Bulolin dared to do so, the poison in the tea must be extraordinary. Since the attendant was not a cultivation practitioner, the Pure Heaven Bureau was not afraid that he would commit suicide, so they did not use the Yuanqi lock, but only tied his hands with a rope. Sensing the gaze of State Duke, the attendant's face turned pale, and he was so terrified that he couldn't kneel down. He collapsed on the ground, his body trembling. Seeing his reaction, Duke Lu knew that this attendant must have been instigated or coerced by someone, and had no idea what was going on. He didn't even know that the mastermind was Bulolin. Duke Lu waved his hand to signal for him to be dragged out of the room. It was a bit chaotic. People were everywhere in the corridor, their clothes wet by the rainwater rubbing against each other. An official shouted that he had something important to report. He squeezed through the crowd anxiously and came to the front of the room. As he was about to step over the threshold, the drizzle in the corridor suddenly became chaotic. A gust of evil wind blew over from nowhere. Chapter 246. The slanting wind and fine rain fell on the official's face, causing a slight pain. He didn't know what had happened, but he sensed something was not right. He had no time to approach Duke Lu, so he crushed the amulet hidden in his sleeve. Boom! A loud boom. The ground quaked, the smoke and dust rose up, and the surprised screams continued. A few people who were close to the ground were knocked away, hitting the walls. As the smoke and dust settled, the official was seen sitting on the ground, covered in blood, the green stone floor under his body full of cracks. As he crushed the amulet, a shapeless light shield fell down from the eaves of Taichung Temple, encasing him inside. It was unclear what kind of magic treasure the light shield was, but it blocked all the explosive force of the amulet inside, and all the air waves and destructive force landed on the official's body. As the strong wind rose again, a few clear fingerprints appeared on the official's body, and an iron chain appeared on his wrist, which was the Yuanqi lock of the Pure Heaven Bureau. The official had no way to stop the amulet. Looking at Duke Lu sitting in the chair, his eyes filled with shock. The amulet was the weapon he used to assassinate Duke Lu, but couldn't even break through a light shield. Was this the rumored slanting wind and fine rain? The official suddenly thought of this possibility, and then he realized that Taichung Temple had prepared for this, so the assassination attempt had been exposed a long time ago. "How did you know my identity?" he asked Duke Lu in surprise. Duke Lu didn't answer the question, saying, "I thought you people would attack me outside, but I didn't expect you to choose Taichung Temple. Don't you know that nobody here can kill me?" The official was taken aback, not understanding what Jingju meant. Duke Lu continued, "You are merely an assassin, so you don't know why Bulow Lin wants to kill me. But I think you should know the relationship between Bulow Lin and the underworld. You should reflect on your actions in the underworld in the future." Thinking of the darkness under Taichung Temple, the official's face grew paler, his eyes filled with resentment and despair. Of course, he wanted to commit suicide, but everything happened so suddenly that he didn't have the chance to do so. At this time, he had lost all possibilities. Duke Lu looked at the assassin who was being dragged away and subconsciously reached for a cup of tea, but his hand touched nothing. He laughed at himself and asked, "Is there more?" "There's nothing here." A slightly fat man walked out from the crowd, wearing a large cloak. Imperial Consecrator Jin Mingxing. The crowd retreated like a tide, and Taichung Temple immediately regained its peace and order. All of the chaos was artificially created, regardless of whether it was the chaos from before or the chaos that should have appeared but was controlled. Jin Mingcheng furrowed his brows and asked, "Assassinating a duke to create chaos? It feels weird. Also, why does Bulow Lin want to create chaos here?" Duke Lu said, "Only by killing me can they get the key from me. At the same time, they can cause chaos. Killing two birds with one stone. Why not?" Jin Mingcheng said with a grave expression, "It looks like their target is indeed the Fiend Prison." Duke Lu said, "It's not difficult to know that the Fiend Prison is under Taichung Temple. Not many people know that I have the key, and they're confident that they can achieve their goal by obtaining the key. It means that this person knows a lot about the Fiend Prison." Jin Mingcheng said, "But that person's state shouldn't be very high." "Yes," Duke Lu confirmed. "It's because he doesn't know that nobody here can kill you." Jin Mingxing repeated what Duke Lu had said earlier. Duke Lu said with a faint smile, "The point is what Bulow Lin wants to do in the Fiend Prison. It's up to you to investigate." Jin Mingcheng said, "Various places have already started to investigate. The matter will be over today, but I don't think we can investigate that far." He sat by Duke Lu, saying nothing more. The spring rain fell in the courtyard outside. It was quiet in Taichung Temple. It didn't take long before the voices rang out in the spring rain. There were the names of the targets who had just been arrested. Many places in Zhaoga City were arresting people that day. The Pure Heaven Bureau and the Magic Army were all out. What nobody knew was that an elder in the Huashan state of the Zhongzhou school was in charge of the office of the Pure Heaven Bureau last night. Hearing the names, the expressions on Duke Lu and Jin Mingxing's faces didn't change much. They eyed each other when two names were called out. The first name was Lu Xiang, a disciple of the second generation of the Kunlun sect, and the South Principal of the Pure Heaven Bureau. The second name was Yang Changyu, the Associate Law Officer of Taichung Temple. The rain kept on falling. The voices outside hadn't been heard for a long time, so the arresting should be over. Jin Mingcheng stood up and shook his head regretfully, saying, "They are all bugs." Duke Lu said, "If there are too many bugs, the beams and pillars will be damaged, and the building will collapse." "The Emperor won't be satisfied," said Jin Mingxing. Duke Lu said, "The important figures won't strike so easily." Jin Mingcheng said, "What the Emperor doesn't understand is why the first child sword is still in the same spot after so many years, and hasn't been moved." Lu Gong didn't say anything more. He had brought Zhao Liu and Gu Qing to the royal palace that night, so he knew about it. But he still didn't understand why the Emperor sent the first child sword away. On the top of Shima Peak, Jing Jiu said, "As I said, the Emperor is just taking advantage of the situation. If the descendants of the old devil of the South Sea are really from the West Ocean, They will definitely want to take back the first child sword. As a result, the pressure will fall on Aoyama through you. Even if Aoyama wants to tolerate the West Ocean for a few more years, they will have no choice but to start the war earlier. Zhao Liu was a bit surprised, saying, I thought the emperor had a good relationship with Aoyama. I didn't expect him to use us. Jingjiu said, if I were here, he would treat Aoyama differently, but I was in the snowland at the time, so he probably didn't know what was going on. Zhao Liu said, but nobody expected me to give the sword to Shui. Jingjiu took the teacup handed over by Gu Qing and said, you did it so casually, but many people couldn't figure it out. Your luck is indeed very good. Zhao Liu said, what you should be concerned about is his luck. Gu Qing and Yuan Shu were listening by the side, and they knew she was talking about Lu Shui. Jingjiu said, it was just a game of playing house, but it shocked the whole world. I don't know how his luck is, but he has a good momentum. Zhao Liu and the other two could tell that Jingjiu was not in a good mood. This compliment was more like mockery, or rather, annoyance. Based on Lu Shui's temperament, it was impossible for him to leave Bulolin in advance. Would he be able to leave in time after today? Let's enjoy the scenery. Jingjiu said this after taking a sip of the tea. After many days, the master and disciple chatted on the Shima Peak again. Gu Qing brewed a pot of tea because there was a good scenery to enjoy. Hundreds of flying swords suddenly appeared in the midst of the Green Mountains. Hundreds of sword lights flew toward the distant West Ocean like a meteor shower. Chapter 247. The flying sword vanished in the distant sky and couldn't be seen anymore. Are we really not going? Asked Zhao Liu while looking at Jingjiu. Jingjiu didn't respond to this question. He got up and walked back to the manor cave. Zhao Liu, Gu Qing, and Yuan Shu eyed each other speechlessly, not knowing what to say. The situation was clear now. Lu Shui should be in the most dangerous situation, and he might die at any moment. Why didn't he go and have a look? The Kunlun sect and Zhaoga City had already taken action. Ozawa, the Mirror sect, the Baodong Zen Temple, the Shui Yu Nunnery, and the Guocheng Temple had all taken action. The No Mercy sect would do even more. The highly achieved swordsmen of the deviant sects would be ignored for the time being. The informers and spies planted by Bulo Lin in the Orthodox sects and the Imperial Court will be wiped out one by one from that day on. Walking in the crowd of Haizhou City, Lu Shui thought of the news he had just received and knew he had to leave. But could he still leave now? He walked into the restaurant and sat in the familiar private room. Xiao had already prepared the meal for him. He thanked her and sat across from her, picking up the chopsticks and starting to eat. Like before, Jingjiu seldom spoke, and Xiao was also very quiet. However, the peep of music outside the door sounded a bit odd. After a long while, the peep of music stopped. Xiao said softly with her head lowered, I've just received the news that many things have happened today. Lu Shui's hand holding the teapot stiffened slightly, wondering if the peep of music was the message. Xiao lifted her head and said to him, I don't understand why you haven't left yet. Lu Shui picked up the teapot and poured some tea in her cup, saying, It looks like you know a lot of things. In fact, I also know you were sent by them to spy on me. Xiao said, I know you were a spy sent by the Aoyama sect. After a moment of silence, Lu Shui asked, How long have you known? Xiao said, It's been a long time. I knew it the first time I saw you. Lu Shui looked at her in silence for a long time and said, Have some tea. Xiao raised the teacup and took a sip. Lu Shui raised his teacup and drank it in one gulp. Xiao picked up the teapot and filled his cup again. The peep of music stopped. The street was noisy, but the restaurant was very quiet. After a long while, Lu Shui stood up, ready to leave. Xiao looked up at him and said, Since you are ready to leave, why don't you kill me to silence me? Lu Shui said, I don't know what you've done in the past, but many people will die today. Why should you be one more? This was Haizhou City. Bulo Lin was on the cloud platform outside the city. Even if the Western Sea Sword School did not intervene, it would be difficult for him to escape. However, he was very calm. There was no fear or despair on his face. Are you ready to die? Xiao He asked while looking at him. Lu Shui nodded. Xiao He said, that won't do. Lu Shui didn't understand what she meant. More than 10 years ago, this was an inn. Later, I bought it and transformed it into a restaurant. Xiao He didn't finish her words. The restaurant that had been transformed from an old and suddenly collapsed, its outer wall completely shattered. The noise on the street disappeared without a trace. Smoke and dust filled the air, but it couldn't block the view. There was no one around the ruins of the restaurant. It was a very strange scene. A burly, black-clothed man appeared on the west side of the street. His face was covered by a veil hat, which seemed to have 2 horns inside. He wore 2 boxing gloves, which were decorated with diamonds that looked like stars. A thin, middle-aged man appeared on the east side of the street. He wore ordinary clothes and exuded a dry and cold aura, like the wind in the vast sea desert. He held a light brown bottle in his arms, which was unknown whether it was made of jade or porcelain. Lu Shui knew these 2 highly achieved swordsmen of the deviant sections. In other words, he had read many records about these 2 highly achieved swordsmen of the deviant sects in the files. The tall and sturdy man in black with the boxing gloves and horns on his head was called Tu Chiu, a devil practitioner with unimaginable strength, able to break a mountain with one punch. These 2 highly achieved swordsmen of the deviant sects were called Yu Bu Huan, a deviant practitioner of the Cold Mountain. The bottle in his arms was called the Barren Bottle, which could absorb all the moisture in the surroundings, including the blood. These 2 highly achieved swordsmen of the deviant sects with a swordsman Bulow Lin could mobilize in the vicinity of Haizhou City at any time. Either of them had a higher cultivation state than Lu Shui. Lu Shui didn't feel afraid. Instead, he felt a bit relieved. The 2 swordsmen were highly achieved swordsmen of the deviant sections. Since the swordsmen of the Western Sea Sword School didn't show up, it meant that Bulow Lin still hoped to live in the darkness of night. As such, he still had a chance. All of a sudden, the sound of zither rang out, making people feel annoyed. The expression on Lu Shui's face changed slightly. The surrounding courtyards collapsed abruptly. A young girl in a short skirt with silvery bells all over her body rode a blood-red elephant to the front of the restaurant. The silvery bells on her body shook incessantly, but they didn't make any sound. It was because the sound of the green stone zither in her arms was too loud. Nanzheng, a rogue practitioner from the mountains in the south, looked like a young girl, but she was actually more than 200 years old. She had a profound cultivation state, and her methods were extremely vicious and powerful. Lu Shui knew that he couldn't escape. My master wants to see you. Nanzheng said this expressionlessly while looking at him. Lu Shui responded. He didn't waste any time and wielded his sword. The flying sword pierced toward Tu Chiu along with a bright light. At the same time, more than 10 fists with demonic fire flew through the air. Their target was still Tu Chiu. He was well aware that Yu Buhuan's cultivation state was the weakest among the 3 highly achieved swordsmen of the deviant sects, but the Barren Bottle was too formidable. Nanzheng was not someone he could challenge at the moment. He could only choose Tu Chiu as a breakthrough point. The flying sword was refined by him after he killed Lo Huainan. It wasn't powerful enough, but his blood devil skill had reached the peak of the 5th level. The zither sounded again. His flying sword suddenly stopped in the air, as if it was bound by invisible strings and couldn't move forward at all. More than a dozen fists with demonic fire came to Tu Chiu. Tu Chiu growled and punched out with both fists. The diamonds on the boxing gloves became unusually bright and turned into 2 light seals the size of houses, blocking the fists with devil flames. Boom! Boom! A series of dull crashing sounds rang out. Tu Chiu's veil hat was blown full of holes by the howling wind, revealing his face full of bristles and 2 ugly horns. Lu Shui turned around and left without hesitation. The zither sounded again. Tu Chiu raised both fists in front of his face. Yu Buhuan held the Barren Bottle and retreated a few steps. An invisible wave spread out in all directions with a blood-red elephant as the center. Even though there was no wind, The rubble on the ground floated up and shot in all directions like sharp arrows. Lu Shui knelt on one knee in the ruins. Countless tiny cracks appeared on his fists in front of him, and tiny beads of blood oozed out of them. Sitting on the back of the elephant, Nanzheng looked at him and said coldly, "If you resist again, you'll die." Yu Buhuan picked up the barren bottle and aimed it at Lu Shui in the ruins. The beads of blood oozing out of the tiny cracks suddenly grew larger and then left his skin, flying into the distance and falling into the barren bottle. Then, the beads of blood turned into blood water and left Lu Shui's body. The dirty water in the ruins of the restaurant also left the ground and flew into the distance. Lu Shui felt that his life was fading away along with the blood water. Just as he was about to do something, he suddenly felt darkness in front of him. Hundreds of green lotus leaves grew out of the ruins, among which were a few pale, pink lotus flowers. The edges of the green lotus leaves were withering and curling at a speed visible to the naked eye. But the magic power of the barren bottle was temporarily blocked by these lotus leaves. Nanzheng raised her eyebrows and plucked the strings of the bowstring with her fingers. With a crisp crack, the lotus flowers were crushed into powder and the tea leaves were broken into pieces, exposing the ground of the ruins. An entrance to a tunnel could be vaguely seen in the ruins, but it had been blocked by rubble. Chapter 248. The sound of zither rang out again. The ruins of the restaurant were cleared by an invisible force, revealing the entrance of the tunnel. The zither sound entered through the cracks of the gravel. Yu Buhuan and Tu Qiu looked at Nanzheng. Nanzheng shook her head. There were many forks in the tunnel, and many formations that could block the spiritual awareness had been set up in advance, so her zither sound couldn't catch up with them. It seemed that the other side had made arrangements in advance. Thinking of this, the three of them had a strange look on their faces. They were all trusted followers of their master. If Lu Shui betrayed them, why did Xiao He also betray them? It was very dark in the tunnel without any light. Even with the demon fire burning in his eyes, he could only see very close by. Besides, the design of the tunnel was very complicated. Lu Shui didn't know where they were at the moment. He could only tell from the dry and wet air that they were circling around Haizhou City. Then, judging from the temperature of the hand holding his, he could tell that she was also very nervous. It was the first time for him to hold a girl's hand. He was not used to it, but somehow he felt at ease. Just like every time they had a meal in a restaurant, they sat across the table and didn't need to talk. It was natural and peaceful. The two of them held hands as they walked down the tunnel in silence. As their arms swayed, something slid from her wrist to his. The surface of the thing was very smooth and cool. It seemed to be a metal bracelet. Lu Shui wanted to remind her, but Xiao He suddenly stopped. The pearls on both sides of the tunnel lit up, illuminating the stone wall in front of them. She walked to the stone wall and started to dismantle the mechanism. Her fingers left a series of residual shadows, which were hard to see with naked eyes. Looking at her back, Lu Shui asked, "Why did you save me?" He had known that Xiao He worked for Bulo Lin a long time ago, and her position should not be low. She might even be a trusted follower of Shiwang's Sunday. He was already confused by Xiao He's warning in the restaurant, not to mention what she was doing now. "I didn't finish what I wanted to say." Xiao He didn't turn around. She explained while dismantling the mechanism. "That restaurant used to be an inn. Many years ago, I met a man and a woman in that inn. Before they left, they took something for me and left something for me. The man told me that I would meet you in the future, so no matter what you want to do, I will help you complete it." Lu Shui didn't understand and asked, "Why did you agree with him? And how did you know it was me?" After a moment of silence, Xiao He said, "Because I'm afraid of him." She didn't answer him. How did she know he was that person? Accompanied by a heavy grinding sound, the seemingly complete stone wall slowly opened up, revealing the passage behind it. Xiao He led him into the hall. The tunnel behind the stone wall was equally complicated, and fake forks could appear at any time. Moreover, the formation that isolated divine sense was appearing more and more frequently. Lu Shui asked, "You prepared for many years?" Yes. There was no emotional fluctuation in Xiao He's voice, but she raised her arm to wipe her eyes. It seemed that she was crying. Lu Shui thought that this woman was really strange. The two of them walked in silence for a long time and finally arrived at the end of the tunnel. In a wild mountain outside Haizhou City, a cliff and the green trees on it had collapsed, revealing the exit of the tunnel. Relying on the sunlight and the terrain, Lu Shui estimated the approximate location and time. He thought of something and lowered his head to look at the bracelet. He couldn't help but be startled. He was very familiar with this bracelet. He had seen it for a whole year in the small village. A gust of wind suddenly rose in the desolate and quiet mountain. The sound of zither came from the distant wind. Xiaoyi's face turned a bit pale. She didn't expect that her preparation for so many years wouldn't have any effect, and that Bulow Lin's men would catch up with them so quickly. Then she thought of the pavilion of heavenly calculation of the Western Sea Sword School and understood what was going on. She couldn't help but feel a bit hopeless, wondering how they could escape. She glanced at Lu Shui and found that his body was trembling slightly. She forced a smile and said, "Don't be afraid. We still have a chance." Lu Shui withdrew his gaze from the bracelet and looked into her eyes, saying seriously, "I'm not afraid, I'm excited." Xiaoyi thought that this man was really strange. The sound of zither came faster than the wind. Accompanied by a loud and dull thud, the huge red elephant landed in the wild mountain, as if it wanted to merge with the sunset. Sitting on the back of the elephant, Nanzheng looked at them indifferently with the greenstone zither in her arms. Yu Buhuan and Tu Qiu also landed on both sides of the wild mountain. The positions chosen by the three swordsmen of Bulow Lin were perfect, blocking all the routes that Lu Shui could use to leave by riding his sword. Without talking or asking why Xiao he had betrayed Bulow Lin, Nanzheng's fingers fell on the zither, directly producing a strong sound with an awe-inspiring murderous intent. The invisible sound wave spread across the mountain, and hundreds of big trees collapsed with a loud crash. Xiaoyi took a step forward and thrust her right palm forward. Dozens of green lotus leaves rose with the wind. With a series of crackling sounds, the lotus leaves were all shattered. Blood spilled out from the corner of Xiaoyi's mouth, and she took 3 steps back. "Let me." Lu Shui stood in front of her. Seeing this scene, Nanzheng slightly narrowed her eyes. Chapter 249. The flying sword sped up abruptly and dashed toward Lu Shui. It turned into a flowing light in an instant and was on the verge of killing him. Before Lu Shui could react, and before Xiao he could scream in surprise, the flowing light had turned back into the flying sword again, hovering around his neck in silence. In such a short distance, the sword could actually accelerate so violently and then suddenly stop. It was truly a miraculous thing. The sharp tip of the sword touched the jasmine flower gently, like a dragonfly touching the surface of the water. The jasmine flower dispersed and turned into the purest sword awareness without any impurities, entering the flying sword. The flying sword vibrated at a high speed, making a buzzing sound and growing brighter. It suddenly disappeared in front of Lu Shui, flying toward the red elephant in the sunset with an ear-piercing whistle. The flying sword could make no sound, but it was so happy that it wanted to sing a song when it could finally show its power in heaven and earth again after more than 10 years. On the top of the Shima Peak, White Ghost opened his eyes and propped himself up, walking to the cliff's edge against cold cicada. He lowered his head slowly to smell a wild flower, a hint of a smile showing in his eyes. As he raised his head, he found that Zhao Liu and the other two were still deep in thought. The smile in his eyes turned into a mocking one. Couldn't he figure out such a simple question? With Jing Jiu's current cultivation state, he would be killed if he went there. Those swords would be more reliable. Speaking of which, how many swords did this guy have? White Ghost narrowed his eyes, thinking that he would have struck a long time ago if he could be sure of the answer. The sword light vanished in the wild mountain, but the whistling sound of the sword was still echoing. Nanjing's pupils shrank slightly. No matter how high her cultivation state was, she didn't dare to be careless when facing a flying sword of the fairy state. Her 10 fingers danced on the zither as fast as lightning. The zither's sounds were dense and fell down like a rainstorm, turning into countless shapeless lines and forming layers of defense in front of her. The air suddenly changed shape, indicating that a certain force was trying to break through the defense. With several soft sounds of silk tearing, the flying sword easily cut through more than 10 strings of zither music and left a clear bloody mark on her face. The speed of the flying sword had slowed down a little, but it was still extremely terrifying. In the blink of an eye, it had arrived in front of Tu Chio, who was several miles away. Tu Chio's expression was extremely unsightly. He let out a loud roar and clenched his right fist to meet the sword light. He tried his best to endure the pain of losing his arm so that he wouldn't scream again. Nanjing said in a cold voice, "It's better that they left. Otherwise, even if we could kill them, you would have to pay with your lives." Tu Chio grunted and stood up with difficulty. "But what should we tell our master?" he asked uneasily. Nanjing turned to look at the cloud in the west that lingered all year round, her face unsightly. The flying sword moved forward and the ground moved backward. It was like a high-speed picture which could easily make people dizzy. It didn't take long for the flying sword to reach dozens of miles away. At this speed, they should be able to see Aoyama soon, right? Lu Shui felt very happy thinking about it. The flying sword under his feet vibrated slightly, as if it was also very happy. The flying sword was very short, only 2 feet long. It was a bit inconvenient for Lu Shui and Xiaohe to stand on it. Standing behind him, Xiaohe had no choice but to put her arms around his waist and put her face on his back. She couldn't see her expression, so it was hard to tell whether she was happy or not. Suddenly, a dignified and indifferent voice came down from the sky. "Come back." Lu Shui recognized that it was Shuang's son's voice, but he didn't say anything and ignored it. The flying sword sped up again, because it knew it couldn't deal with this voice. Shuang's son's voice came again, as if the flying sword couldn't get rid of him no matter how fast it traveled. "In fact, I wasn't sure it was you, because I thought it didn't make sense. I'm curious about the reason why you betrayed me. If you're willing to come back, I'll spare your life." Lu Shui turned to look at the cloud platform in the distance, which was about to disappear into the horizon, saying nothing. He believed that Shuang's son wouldn't lie. As long as he gave up resisting, he would be able to live. But living didn't mean it was a good thing. In the files of Bulow Lin, he had seen too many miserable examples of people who wished to die, but couldn't. Lu Shui looked ahead in silence. He couldn't see Aoyama yet, but Aoyama was right in front of him. Shuang's son's sigh appeared in his mind. A bolt of lightning emerged from the distant cloud platform and struck their flying swords accurately from a distance of several hundred miles. Lu Shui and Xiao, he fell from the sword. The wind was a bit cold. Chapter 250. Lu Shui opened his eyes and woke up. He found himself on the ground, and Xiao he was unconscious beside him. Judging from what he could see, they must have fallen into the mountain from the sky and created a big pit, and now they were lying at the bottom of the pit. Lu Shui wanted to check on Xiao He, but he felt an unbearable pain as soon as he moved, as if all the bones in his body had been broken. He checked himself with the sword discernment and found that he was seriously injured, and both his sword pill and demon core were greatly shaken. Xiao He woke up. Seeing his pale face, she wanted to help him up, but her injury was affected, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. The flying sword hovering in the air in silence also became a bit dimmer, not as bright and aggressive as before. Lu Shui was very surprised. As the mastermind of Bulow Lin, Shuang's son must have a very high cultivation state, but he didn't expect that the opponent's sword intent could still be so powerful from more than 200 miles away. Even those peak heads in the broken sea state of the Aoyama sect couldn't do this, because the sword intent wasn't a real flying sword. There was another thing that shocked him more, and that was this flying sword. If it weren't for this sword, they would have been dead by now. No matter how high the spiritual state of this sword was, it was still unimaginable that it could block Shuang Sun's thunderous strike without the help of its owner. Is this the legendary flying sword of the fairy level? Xiaohe's face was a bit pale, either because of the severe injury or the fact that this flying sword of the fairy level had stayed on her wrist for 10 years. Lu Shui was about to answer when he suddenly sensed something. He struggled to stand up with the help of the stone wall beside the pit and looked toward the east. Hundreds of sword lights suddenly appeared in the sky, flying toward Haizhou City like a meteor shower. Seeing this spectacular scene, Lu Shui's eyes were filled with complicated emotions. He felt relaxed, but he also couldn't hide his excitement. Judging from a number of sword lights, Aoyama had sent almost all of its disciples above the undefeated state. Xiaohe stood up and looked at the sword lights that filled the sky. After a long silence, she said, "The Aoyama sect has come out in full force." Lu Shui glanced at her and hesitated for a while, but he still couldn't help but say, "Miss Xiaohe, you are on our side now, so this word might not be appropriate." It was only then that Xiaohe realized that it was not very positive to turn out in full strength. She smiled embarrassedly. The sky full of sword lights flew towards the West Sea. Soon after, countless treasured lights appeared, and several treasured ships could be seen. In the end, a wave surged in the sky, its momentum astonishing. "The water and sky streak of Ozawa," Xiaohe said in a trembling voice, her face even paler. She had prepared for 10 years to leave Bulow Lin, but as a demon cultivator, she still had some fear towards the righteous sections. Seeing such a scene, she naturally felt fear. Lu Shui looked at the sky in silence. It was well known that such a large force was rarely seen in the cultivation circle in 100 years. The last time a similar scene had occurred was during the monster invasion. What had happened that day would shake the whole of Chaotian, and it could be said that it was because of him. He should feel proud, but he didn't. He couldn't tell why, but he felt a bit complicated inside. The orthodox cultivation sects were about to attack Haizhou City. No matter how powerful Bulow Lin was, he wouldn't be able to fend for himself, so he wouldn't pursue Jingjiu and Xiaohe. Shuang Sun should think he was already dead. Jingjiu helped Xiaohe to the ground and intended to ride the sword to leave, but he found that he couldn't establish a connection with the flying sword due to his severe injury. The flying sword became quieter after being struck by Shuang Sun, looking like a man who had exhausted all his energy. Lu Shui looked at Xiaohe and asked, "Can you still walk?" Xiaohe shook her head. Lu Shui turned around and motioned for her to get on his back. Xiaohe didn't hesitate to hug his neck, asking, "Where are you going?" Lu Shui wrapped his hands around her legs and held them in front of his body so that he wouldn't touch her body. "If you don't have a place to go, why don't you come back to Aoyama with me first?" Xiaohe thought that she was a devil cultivation practitioner and couldn't stay in Aoyama's sect for a long time. Then she thought of Jingjiu's promise and said after a moment of silence, "Okay." Lu Shui walked toward the forest with her on his back. The flying sword followed him in silence. The mountain descended into a dark and gloomy valley, and there was a precipice in front of the valley. "Let's take a rest there first," Lu Shui said, while looking at a spot in the precipice. This place was still a long way from Aoyama, so he couldn't get there in his current condition. Moreover, Xiaohe's injury was more severe, so she needed a place to recuperate. The precipice was full of green vines, and a manor cave was hidden in it. He walked to the stone wall with Xiaohe on his back, activated the forbidding spell, and walked in. The flying sword didn't follow them in, but drifted to a place in the forest and looked at the slightly raised ground, seeming to be curious. Looking at the simple furnishings in the manor cave, Xiaohe was also curious, asking, "Is this the hiding place you prepared in advance?" Lu Shui put her on the bed gently and explained, "Before I entered Bulow Lin, I stayed here for a while. Later, I asked Shuang Sun for it." Xiaohe was a little worried, asking, "Aren't you afraid that they will find you?" "At this moment, they won't be in the mood to care about us, and they won't expect us to stay here. He took out a healing magic pill from the stone box and fed it to her, saying, "And the forbidding spell here is very strong. Even if Shi Wang's son came in person, he wouldn't be able to get in here in a short time." Hearing this, Xiao He felt a little relieved. She closed her eyes and began to regulate her breathing to heal her injury. Lu Shui had taken the devil pill and practiced related magic methods, so his understanding of monster cultivation was far better than that of common cultivation practitioners. The magic pill he took out was very suitable for her. It didn't take long for Xiao He to open her eyes and wake up. She was much more energetic than before, and her face was not as pale as before. "There's something I want to ask you." Lu Shui hesitated for a while and asked, "Was it Jing Jiu who asked you to help me back then?" Xiao He stared at his eyes, thinking that he didn't know. She said, "It was him. I'm just wondering why he knew you would join Bulo Lin." Lu Shui explained earnestly, "Because young master is the smartest person in the world." Thinking that she would meet him in Aoyama, Xiao He felt a little scared subconsciously. She wanted to know more, so she asked, "Besides being smart, what kind of person is he on Earth?" After thinking for a while, Lu Shui came up with his conclusion. Young master is a good person. In his opinion, even an enemy or a bad person like Lo Huainan said that young master was a good person, so his judgment must be correct. Thinking of Jing Jiu, Xiao He felt a pain in her shoulder, as if the ice-cold iron sword was still stuck in it. She didn't believe Lu Shui's words at all. She said angrily, "He's so cold and heartless, but he's a good person? In my opinion, he's an evil person." Lu Shui shook his head and said, "Young master isn't an evil person. He's a good person." Xiao He looked at his eyes and said while gritting her teeth, "An evil person." Lu Shui didn't get angry. He told her what had happened back then, trying to convince her with the deeds of his young master. The story started in the small village and ended when he left Aoyama. Chapter 251. Lu Shui thought, "I didn't mean that, but what you said seems right." Xiao He suddenly asked, "Do you know when was the happiest moment in all these years?" Lu Shui shook his head. Xiao He said, "It was today in the tunnel when I held your hand and ran forward." Hearing this, Lu Shui was startled, feeling a bit embarrassed, his face red and ears hot. Seeing him like this, Xiao He knew he had misunderstood something. She chuckled and said, "What are you thinking? I mean the bracelet." Lu Shui came to his senses and asked why. "After confirming that the person I was waiting for was you, I felt much more relaxed. More importantly, the bracelet finally left my body." Xiao He's face turned pale again as she thought of the mental pressure brought by the bracelet in the past 10 years. The bracelet seemed to be watching her and warning her that if she dared to disobey Jing Jiu's will, she would be cut into 2 pieces, both physically and mentally. Because of this fear, she could only listen to Jing Jiu and wait for Lu Shui to show up. Then, she hid it from everyone in Bulo Lin and secretly prepared to escape. This kind of mental pressure was unbearable torture for anyone. To get rid of this pressure, she had to take off the bracelet first. But she couldn't take it off her wrist no matter how many times she tried. In the end, she even thought of cutting off her own hand. But when she was about to cut off her hand, she clearly felt that this method was useless. She looked into Lu Shui's eyes and said softly, 10 years ago, he told me that I would meet you next year or even later. But you never showed up. I bought that in and changed the tunnel under Haijo City little by little, but I never knew who I was preparing for. It was a bad feeling, lonely, helpless, and at a loss. Lu Shui understood it very well. He understood it very well. So he understood why Xiao He disliked the young master so much. He wanted to touch her head, just like the young master used to do. But when he reached out his hand halfway, he realized it was not right and withdrew it awkwardly, saying, "The young master is indeed heartless to outsiders." Xiao He glanced at him with a hint of mockery in her eyes. Lu Shui didn't understand the meaning hidden in her eyes and continued, "But we still met in the end." That night, Haijo City was full of festive lanterns. For some reason, he raised his head on the street and saw Xiao He in the restaurant. At that time, he had seen her eyes, but she had seen the jasmine flower on his collar. Thinking of that scene, Xiaohe's expression softened a little, and she said, "Your young master is really good to you." Yes, that's why I was very happy when I saw the bracelet. It turns out that the young master has always been looking at me, worried about me, and never doubted me. Lu Shui said with a smile, "I didn't expect that everyone in Aoyama was fooled by me, including Shuang's son, but I failed to fool him." Xiaohe said, "I didn't expect that someone like you would lie to others." Lu Shui scratched his head in embarrassment and said, "Actually, my acting skills are very good." Xiaohe glanced at him and said nothing with a smile. "It's true. You don't know how I acted the day I left Aoyama. Do you know how to act like that? First of all, I had to look good. I hadn't washed my hair for half a year, and I rolled on the ground every day, wearing my clothes out. I also stayed up late to make my eyes red and haggard. When I finally appeared, I looked like a ghost." Lu Shui was beaming with joy as he kept waving his hands. He was getting more and more excited. Of course, the most important thing is my emotions and words. I know that I'm a little stupid, so I've practiced it many times. The kind of unwillingness, despair, and anger, it's really too realistic. It's definitely at a level that would make anyone who heard it cry. It's a pity that you weren't there at that time, or else you would have definitely cried. Especially at the end, when my meridians were broken and I was chased out of the sect. The few words I asked the young master were even more perfect. Even I myself am extremely touched. And Xiao, he suddenly said, "Have you ever thought that Jing Jiu would be very angry if he knew you were lying to him?" Lu Shui looked a bit sluggish and said, I didn't think about it." "You didn't think about it? Or you didn't dare to think about it?" Xiaohe's eyes moved slightly as she said, "What you said even moved you. Is it possible that you really thought about it at that time?" Lu Shui thought for a while and sighed. "Maybe a bit. At that time, everyone thought I stole the devil pill, so I was interrogated by Shanda Peak and forgotten in Tianguang Peak. But I thought my young master would care about me and believe me. Who knew that he would continue to travel in the human world and didn't come back at all? Even after he came back, he didn't even ask someone to bring me a message, let alone visit me." Seeing the sad expression on his face, Xiaohe shook her head and said, "Are you stupid? You said you couldn't fool him. Since he knew the truth, why would he care about you?" Lu Shui came to his senses again and said, "Right." Then he said, "That's not right." Xiaohe opened her eyes wide and asked, "Is it right or not?" Lu Shui's eyes lit up as he said, "Since my young master already knew the truth, he was still able to keep his composure. That's good acting. Compared to him, I'm really far behind. I'm still a bit exaggerated." Xiaohe couldn't stand it anymore. She found a teapot and filled it with spring water, pouring a cup for herself. Lu Shui didn't care what she was doing at all and continued, "My young master is good at everything. When he was at my home, it only took him 9 days to learn everything. He could plant rice seedlings as straight as a line. Later, I went home and practiced for a long time, but I was still not as good as him. Oh, and the sword that my young master left for you, you saw it. It's not an ordinary flying sword, it's of the fairy state." Hearing this, Xiaohe finally became interested and asked, "What kind of sword is that?" Lu Shui said, "How would I know? My young master had a lot of good stuff with him. When I was at the South Pine Pavilion, he gave me a magic pill." Xiaohe didn't want to say anything more, thinking that Jing Jiu must have given you a magic pill. Otherwise, why would you, a person with natural Tao quality, worship him so much? My young master had a lot of good stuff with him, and he also has a lot of secrets, but I can't tell you. Lu Shui continued, "Have you heard of Zhao Liu? She's the master of the Shinma Peak of our Aoyama sect. She also has a secret, and that secret is related to my young master. I happen to know it, but I still can't tell you." Xiaohe couldn't stand it anymore and asked, "Were you such a talkative person before? In the restaurant in Haizhou City, they often didn't say a word from beginning to end when they were eating at the same table." In her opinion, Lu Shui was a man of great ambition and could endure humiliation. It was natural for him to be silent and persistent. Who would have thought that he would become so long-winded after leaving Haizhou City? Lu Shui was stunned for a long time before he opened his mouth to speak again, but his voice had become much deeper. It's been a long time since I've been able to talk so freely. It was because he had a lot of secrets, because he was under a lot of pressure, and because he had to deceive his peers and enemies. The little boy in the small mountain village, who was curious about everything and talked a lot, had been silent for many years. Xiao He held him in her arms and patted his back gently. Chapter 252. Of course, Lu Shui was a talkative person. Otherwise, Jing Jiu wouldn't have thought of him when he met the young monk of the Guoqing Temple who practiced the vow of silence. Of course, he wasn't as talkative as he was today. He had shouldered too many responsibilities and secrets in the last 10-odd years. He talked less and less because he was worried that he would spill the beans because of the pressure and because he had to play the role of a disciple who was possessed by the devil in a miserable situation. Until today, when Jing Jiu's bracelet turned into a sword to clear the way for him, and countless flying swords of Aoyama headed for the West Ocean, he finally didn't have to play that role anymore and was relieved. He wished he could say all the things he hadn't said in the last 10-odd years. It was quiet in the manor cave for a long time. Xiao He held him in her arms and gently stroked his back. Lu Shui was both moved and nervous. He didn't know where to put his hands and froze in midair, his face reddening more and more. Finally, he couldn't stand it anymore and said in a trembling voice, I'm a little thirsty. Xiao He left his body and laughed while looking at him, saying, You've talked so much. How can you not be thirsty? Lu Shui didn't dare to look at her. He drank up the spring water in the teacup and asked, How do you feel now? With the help of the magic pill and the meditation he had done recently, his wounds were better. Most importantly, his sword source had recovered a lot, so he should be able to ride the sword. Xiao He felt her body and confirmed that her wounds weren't much better, but she should be able to move freely. She nodded. Lu Shui helped her walk to the cliff and said, Did you feel annoyed when I said that my young master in Zhao Liu had many secrets? Xiao He thought, You still know? Lu Shui said, In fact, I also have a secret. Xiao He thought, again, But it's my own secret, so I can tell you. Lu Shui led her to the nearby forest and whistled. When the flying sword heard the voice, it returned to his side. The tip of the sword trembled slightly. From time to time, it would look back as if it was reluctant to part with him. Lu Shui walked to the slightly raised ground in the forest and grabbed the air with his right hand. The soil broke through the air and revealed a sword. The sword was long and thin, and its aura was cold and indiscernible. One look, and one could tell that it was not an ordinary item. The first child's sword. Back in the night palace of Zhaoga City, Jin Mingcheng presented this sword to Zhao Liu on behalf of the emperor, and she gave it to Lu Shui in Hohhot City. In a sense, Lo Huainan had died under this sword. Over the years, Shi Wang's son and many others have been searching for the whereabouts of this sword, but to no avail, because Lu Shui had never used this sword before. Looking at that sword, Xiao He was a little surprised. One of the most important tasks given to her by Shi Wang's son was to find this sword. Unexpectedly, Lu Shui had hidden the first child sword in the forest 100 miles away from Haizhou City. Lu Shui took out the first child sword from the soil, wiped it clean with his sleeve, and put on his waist. The bright small sword quivered slightly, flying around his body incessantly, as if it was eager to hack down and test the hardness of the first child sword. Lu Shui stopped it hurriedly. He held Xiao He's hand, ready to step onto the flying sword and fly away. It was then that a sigh rang out in his mind. When he was fleeing from Haizhou City and riding the sword in the sky, he had also heard a sigh. The sigh was full of sentiments, as well as a bit disappointed and regretful. The sigh was also sentimental, but the disappointed and regretful feeling had turned into contentment and comfort. No matter what kind of sigh it was Shi Wang's son's sigh. The expression on Lu Shui's face changed abruptly. He drew out the first child sword from his waist without hesitation and drew a sword flower in front of him. The small sword also sensed the great danger. It raised its head slightly, ready to fly away. Crack! A flash of lightning suddenly rang out in the cloudless blue sky. The lightning struck on the cliff. It was a loud bang. The rocks on the cliff flew everywhere. Lu Shui and Xiao he fell to the ground, covered in blood. A figure drifted down from the sky. He was wearing a bright yellow robe, with a bead curtain covering his face. His eyes were calm, and his energy was unfathomable, like an emperor. It was Shi Wang's Sunday. The first child sword had left Lu Shui's hand, piercing toward Shi Wang's son's face with a swoosh. The bead curtain fluttered. Shi Wang's son reached out his right hand. It was easy. He grabbed the first child sword. The first child sword struggled for a while, but soon calmed down. Shi Wang's son glanced at the sky, diagonally in front of him. The small sword was hiding behind a rock, as if it was ready to launch a sneak attack. Sensing Shi Wang's son's gaze, the small sword flew toward the back of the mountain without hesitation, disappearing instantly. It runs so fast. What a good sword. Shi Wang's son complimented. He knew that it would take him a long time to subdue that small sword, so he didn't have any other ideas. He looked at Lu Shui, his eyes showing both disappointment and appreciation. I didn't expect that I would be fooled by you kids. How come you are here? Lu Shui said with a pale face. His mind was full of shock and confusion. In his mind, this was something that was impossible to happen. The swordsmen of the Orthodox cultivation sects were besieging the cloud platform, and the secret of Bulo Lin was about to be revealed to the whole world. As the leader of Bulo Lin, Shi Wang's son came to kill him instead of fighting the enemies there. Even though what he had done was the betrayal that Bulo Lin hated the most, was killing him more important than protecting Bulo Lin? Obviously, this is a trap that you have prepared for many years. Even if I stayed on the cloud platform, what else could I do? Seeing Lu Shui's expression, Shi Wang's son knew what was on his mind. He said calmly, "If so, why should I stay there and wait for death?" Lu Shui said, "Then what you should do is run away as soon as possible. Why did you come to kill me? Of course it's important to kill you, but there's another reason I'm following you." Shi Wang's son looked at the first child sword in his hand, the expression in his eyes serious. He only needed a drop of blood to make it his sword. The destruction of the cloud platform was indeed an unbearable price for Bulo Lin, but it could be considered a compensation if he could get the first child sword back. This was the true inheritance of the South Sea. With this sword, he might be able to make a breakthrough in his cultivation state, which had been stagnant for many years. By then, he wouldn't have to be afraid of his big brothers Aoyama and those old guys in Zhongzhou school. Just for this sword? The people on the cloud platform are your most loyal subordinates. You don't care about them at all? Are those people's lives less important than a sword? Lu Shui somehow felt angry. Shi Wang's son drew back his gaze and said to him, "Bulo Lin is a broadsword. What's so special about it? The most important thing is the hand that holds the broadsword. The cloud platform was destroyed, so be it. The assassins and subordinates were dead, so be it. As long as he and those people hiding in the deepest part of the cloud platform were still alive, Bulo Lin would exist forever. Moreover, no matter how powerful Lu Shui was, he still couldn't discover those real broadswords." Lu Shui understood what Shi Wang's son meant, his face turning paler. "Those who will die today are all broadswords, but you are not." Shi Wang's son looked at him and said sentimentally, "The immortal appreciates you very much, and so do I. I had hoped that you could be the next hand that holds the broadsword." Lu Shui said, "I'm sorry to disappoint you. No, in order to gain my trust, you killed Lo Huainan. Only an unparalleled hero can do such a thing. I can only admire you and never feel disappointed." Shi Wang's son said, "It's a pity that I have to kill you today, because I have to give someone an explanation." A sigh suddenly broke out in the cliff. The old scholar of Imatai walked out and said to Shi Wang's son, "It turns out that I'm also a broadsword." Chapter 253. The pen could be used to write good essays. It could be used to paint beautiful rivers and mountains. It could also be used to write talismans. Yamatai was famous for its calligraphy. Using books to make talismans was a talisman. Without the help of these scholars' talismans, How could the magic army of the Jing imperial court resist the tide-like monsters of the snowy kingdom in the north? Those who could write well were not all good people. There was an old scholar named Yamatai in Bulolin. His cultivation state was high, and his background was mysterious. After the old scholar came to Bulolin, he used the pen the most. But he seldom killed people with the pen. He just recorded and analyzed the cases in the cloud platform, and he took in some new people he liked. It was he who took Lu Shui to Bulolin. But he didn't know that he stayed in the cloud platform because of the old scholar's recommendation. In recent years, the old scholar's pen had finally become idle. Maybe it was for this reason that he started to meddle in other people's business. Since it has come to this, why kill one more? The old scholar said while looking at Shiwang. Sunday Shiwang's son said, "If it were before, I would do it for your sake, since I like this kid very much. But not now." "Why?" the old scholar asked. "If it were before, it would be difficult for me to kill you, and it would take me some time, which might expose my whereabouts. But not now." As he said this, Shiwang's son's right hand slid across the first child's sword, and blood oozed out from the gap between his palm and the sword. The first child's sword was covered with blood, but it still had a chilly energy, exuding a terrifying pressure. Seeing this, the old scholar remarked sentimentally, "Is this the first child's sword? It turns out that you are the descendants of that person in the South Ocean." Shiwang's son didn't say anything, but wielded the sword. A chilly sword will left the first child's sword and turned into a real arc light, slashing toward the old scholar from a distance away. The wrinkles on the old scholar's face became deeper because of the wind, making him look very sad. A black brush that was glowing with a precious light flew out from his sleeve and flew at an unimaginable speed. In the blink of an eye, it wrote a character in the air. Lu Shui and Xiao He had no idea what kind of magic treasure this black writing brush was, nor could they make out the characters clearly. Shiwang's son knew that this was the city-guarding pen, one of the 4 treasures of Yamatai. In the past, the respect and tolerance he had shown the old scholar stemmed largely from this. Of course, he also saw clearly that it was the word Jiang. The iron chain crossed the river. Jianghai is the river where the rest of my life is spent. The city-guarding brush glowed with precious light. The character that was written also glowed with precious light in the air. It was like a real iron chain that could block all attacks in the world. When the sword light landed on the word, it did not make any sound, nor was it able to cut through it. It gradually sank into the strokes and was about to disappear. Shiwang's son took a step forward. The bead curtain moved slightly, producing a crisp sound. His yellow robe fluttered in the wind. This step was monarch descent. There was a crisp sound. The word river in the air suddenly shattered. The sword light pierced through the air and landed in front of the old scholar. The old scholar took a few steps back, his face pale. There was another crisp smack. The city-guarding pen fell on the ground, its precious light dimming slightly. This didn't mean that the treasures of Yamatai were not as good as the first child sword of that guy from the South Sea. It was just that the cultivation state of the old scholar was still lower than that of Shiwang Sunday. If the city-guarding pen hadn't protected its owner, he would have been severely wounded. Shiwang's son took another step forward, his momentum even stronger. The old scholar had no intention of backing down. He looked at Shiwang's son in silence, with a sense of relief in his eyes. Shiwang's son's expression suddenly changed slightly, and he turned to look at the horizon in the east. It was unclear what he had sensed, but he turned around and left without hesitation. In an instant, he turned into a flash of sword light and disappeared into the horizon. Despite the sudden change, he still didn't want to let go of Lu Shui. Before he left, he flicked his sleeve lightly, and a sword light aimed at Lu Shui's chest. Lu Shui was severely wounded, so he couldn't dodge this sword attack. Xiao He threw herself on him. In the next moment, she came to her senses and couldn't help but feel a bit regretful. It was unclear if the bracelet had a great influence on her mind over the years, or if she had been thinking about this matter all the time, but it had become an obsession for her to let Lu Shui leave this place alive. She didn't even think about it before she charged forward. How could she be so stupid? Next, he would probably die, right? Would this be considered an idiotic death? Xiao He thought of these things in a self-mocking way, but she found that death didn't come, and she didn't even feel pain. She sat up and found that she wasn't wounded, feeling a bit confused. Then she noticed that Lu Shui was looking behind her with a pale face. Xiao He followed his line of sight and found that the old scholar was standing in front of them. The old scholar looked calm, as if nothing had happened. A fan had appeared in his hand out of nowhere. Lu Shui had seen this fan before. Back in the small village, the old scholar had destroyed the soul of a highly achieved swordsman of the mysterious dark sect with a gentle fan. But just now, he saw clearly that the old scholar had only taken out the fan and didn't do anything else. "Are you all right?" he asked in a trembling voice. "I'm fine," the old scholar said. No sooner had he said this than a faint "pa" sound broke out in the cliff. The old scholar was still wearing the blue robe that had been washed so many times that it had turned white. A tear suddenly appeared on the front lapel of the robe. The fresh blood gushed out. It was still raining in Zhaoga City. It was annoying. The black eaves of Taichung Temple looked shiny after being washed by the rainwater. The people under the eaves were a bit upset. Both the officials of Taichung Temple and the Pure Heaven Bureau were very busy that day. People were being arrested everywhere in Zhaoga City, and people were dying everywhere. And they were fully aware that they couldn't rest the next day, because more people would be sent to Zhaoga City and the Fiend Prison in the next few days, waiting to be interrogated by them. Of course, most of those sent to them were corpses. In addition to killing people, the assassins of Bulow Lin were also very skilled at committing suicide. The most difficult task in wiping out Bulow Lin was to find the spies hidden in the Imperial Court and the Orthodox cultivation sections. The problem was that those assassins would commit suicide on the spot after they failed, so it was impossible to find any clues. There is another very difficult task that people have forgotten because nobody dared dream of having such an opportunity before today. Duke Lu continued while looking at Jin Mingsheng. It is to catch the mastermind behind Bulow Lin. Shi Wang's son was very mysterious. It was said that he was the young brother of the godly swordsman of West Ocean and had great power at the Western Sea Sword School. But few people had seen his true face, save for the winners of the Four Seas Banquet every year. Even those winners of the Four Seas Banquet couldn't be sure if the Shi Wang's son they saw was real or not. If such a figure disappeared into the crowd, it would be hard to find him again. He should be in the upper state of the Broken Sea, or even higher. Few people in Chaotian could defeat him, and he could escape no matter how many people went after him. Jin Mingsheng continued. So the most important thing is to locate him. Of course, the emperor didn't have much hope in finding him in the beginning. Chapter 254. Jin Mingsheng said, "His Majesty's territory is vast. No matter what kind of sword it is, as long as he dares to take it, he will be discovered. Then, naturally, there will be people who will make trouble for him." Hearing this, Duke Lu finally felt relieved and said with a smile, "It seems that the Western Sea Sword School is really in big trouble this time." Those who dared cause trouble for Shi Wang's son had the confidence to defeat him, so they must be one of the few figures in the heavenly arrival state in Chaotian. Jin Mingchang said, "The Western Sea Sword School is really something to be able to survive for so many years after offending the Aoyama sect." Duke Lu asked, "Where did the River Mountain Qianquan painting go? King Wang Peak?" Jin Mingchang said, "No. Hi, Duke. Don't you think that there's a place that's too quiet in the lively continent today?" Duke Lu finally understood. No wonder there was no sound coming from that place that shouldn't be quiet. It was a long day in Chaotian. The Imperial Court and the Orthodox sects had confirmed that the Cloud Platform, an important place in the Western Sea Sword School, was the headquarters of Bulow Lin, and Shi Wang's son was the leader of Bulow Lin. Countless swordsmen were riding on flying swords or magic treasures toward Haizhou City. But there was not the slightest movement from Longevity Mountain. Judging from its name, this place used to be a royal tomb. To put it more precisely, it was the royal tomb of the previous dynasty, which was later used by the No Mercy sect as their mountain gate. This was a taboo for many people, especially the cultivation practitioners, but the No Mercy sect didn't care. This was because they cultivated the Tao of slaughter, which emphasized on using the sword to destroy the world. Heaven and earth had no gratitude towards humans, let alone the emperor and the imperial court. Many years ago, the famous hidden swordsman had stirred up a storm in the world. The orthodox cultivation circle was in a precarious situation. The No Mercy sect was targeted because they occupied the royal tombs of the previous dynasty. They were attacked 4 times by the alliance of the deviant sects in a short span of 10 years, and their mountain gate was almost destroyed during the last attack. Fortunately, the Aoyama powerhouses came to his rescue on a sword, and he was lucky enough to survive. Because of this incident and the similarity between the two sects, the Aoyama sect and the No Mercy sect became allies, and they had been on good terms for generations until now. In the last few years, the No Mercy sect had always been at a disadvantage in the competition with the Western Sea Sword School and had been suppressed badly. As a result, the disciples of the No Mercy sect seldom went out and kept a low profile. But it shouldn't be so quiet today. The Orthodox cultivation sect were besieging the Western Sea Sword School on the Cloud platform, and the No Mercy sect, who had a grudge against the Western Sea Sword School, should have done something. Longevity Mountain was very quiet. Birds could be heard everywhere, and the disciples were practicing their swordsmanship and cultivating diligently. It was even as if they didn't know what was happening in the outside world. In the depths of the mountains, there was a large hall with 10 stone beasts squatting on the eaves. The outer walls were made of green stone, and the ground inside was made of large green bricks. There were 13 steps in front of the hall, and in the middle was a relief of a red-crowned crane. Judging from the layout, this place should be the back hall of the royal tomb of the previous dynasty, which was used as the main hall by the No Mercy sect. The main hall was dimly lit, and the atmosphere was gloomy and cold. An old man sat in the deepest part of the hall. The old man had a head full of white hair, and a few black hairs could be seen when they were very close to him. His head was lowered, so his face couldn't be seen clearly. The name of the No Mercy sect master, Pei Baifa, wasn't due to his white hair. Several hundred years ago, when the highly achieved swordsman of the deviant sects besieged the mountain gate, he was only qualified to retreat to the front gate of the mausoleum. It was because he practiced the most difficult and powerful sword style of the No Mercy sect, the 3,000 white hair swords. In the last several hundred years, he was the only person in the No Mercy sect who had successfully practiced this sword style. When this sword style was practiced to a high level, one sword could travel 1,000 miles, or even farther. However, the sword wills were the spiritual souls, so it consumed a great deal of energy for the swordsman. Every time he wielded the sword, a white hair would grow out, which was why he was called the 3,000 white hair swords. Pei Baifa had a head full of white hair. It was unclear how many swords he had wielded in his life, and how many of them were caused by his experiences over the years. Back when he fought with the sea god of West Sword, he suffered a crushing defeat. If the immortal sect master of Aoyama had intervened, he would have died at the time. Since then, he had stayed behind closed doors to recuperate his wounds on Longevity Mountain, never appearing in public again. In recent years, he had been confined to the Grand Hall, not even seeing his disciples, drinking only clean water. It was rumored that he had been knocked down from the heavenly arrival state by the godly swordsman of West Ocean, and some even said that he was on the verge of death due to his severe injury. If someone paid close attention, they would find that the day Pei Baifa started drinking only clean water was the day after the death of Lo Huainan. Lo Huainan was the principal disciple of the Zhongzhou school, but his death wasn't worthy of the mourning of an important figure like the No Mercy sect master for so long. Pei Baifa lowered his head to look at the sand table in front of him. There were mountains and rivers in the sand table, all of which were the great rivers and mountains of Chaotian. So it was called the mountain and river diagram. There was a small bright spot on the left side of the mountain and river diagram. Pei Baifa had been looking at it for a few years, but the position of the bright spot hadn't changed. Yet the bright spot had flashed slightly a moment ago. It meant that the sword had moved. Pei Baifa still didn't move, because it was not bright enough. All of a sudden, the bright spot became extremely bright, even a bit dazzling. Pei Baifa felt a bit regretful. He had been drinking only clean water for a few years, and he hadn't slept at all. The sword he had been accumulating energy hadn't landed on Jian Shilai in the end. However, it was enough to make the Western Sea Sword School sink into oblivion. While thinking of this, Pei Baifa reached his hand into the mountain and river diagram. The light in the mountain and river diagram grew brighter and brighter. The light refracted on his face through his palm, making his eyes look even paler, looking like jade balls. It turned out that he was blind. Nobody knew that Pei Baifa's body was trembling in the deep end of the Grand Hall. Yet, the disciples of the No Mercy sect soon sensed that something significant was about to happen. It was because the dozens of longevity mountains had suddenly started quaking violently, like an earthquake, or like the stories they had heard many times since they were little children. Did the devil men of the underworld come to the human world through the yellow spring under the mausoleum? The disciples of the No Mercy sect came out from everywhere and stood in the valley in front of the Grand Hall, sensing the change of the energy of heaven and earth, their faces full of bewilderment. Pei Yuan was the hall master of the punishment hall of the No Mercy sect. He was also Pei Baifa's biological elder brother, but he looked much younger than Pei Baifa, and most of his hair was still black. He came to the front of the Grand Hall in a hurry, intending to go in and have a look, but he was stopped by a few elders. I'm worried that something might have happened to the sect master. Pei Yuan's expression was quite anxious. They were brothers after all, so they had a deep affection for each other. An elder said expressionlessly, "The sect master has something important to do today, and nobody is allowed to disturb him. Hall Master Pei, please be patient." Hearing this, Pei Yuan was even more startled, wondering what important matter his elder brother was going to do since he had been wounded for many years and was on the verge of death. More importantly, why hadn't he heard anything about it beforehand? The fairy cranes inlaid on the stone steps sensed the energy coming from the Grand Hall, brightening up as if they were about to come back to life. The stone animals on the eaves looked up at the sky, as if they were expecting something. In the deep end of the Grand Hall, the light from the sand table illuminated Pei Baifa's face and his eyes, which had been blind for many years. The wind rose. His silvery hair danced wildly. A sword shot out from the stone and pierced through the roof of the Grand Hall, turning into a flash of light and disappearing into the sky. A rumble of thunder broke out in the clear sky, followed by a heavy downpour. Chapter 255. There were 3 mistakes in yesterday's chapter. I've corrected them, but I didn't revise the published chapter because I didn't want to whitewash the mistakes in this chapter. Well, I care about you guys so much. A sword traveled 1,000 miles. Heaven and earth corresponded. It was for the heavenly arrival state. It turned out that Pei Baifa's Tao heart hadn't been damaged after being defeated by the godly swordsmen of West Ocean and falling from the heavenly arrival state. He was still the powerful sect master of the No Mercy sect, and his cultivation state was even higher than before. Is that the unseen Lord? Yes, the unseen Lord was a sword. It was the famous sword of Pei Baifa, the No Mercy sect master. It hadn't appeared in the human world for a long time. The disciples of the No Mercy sect stood in the rainstorm and yelled excitedly while looking at the trace left by the flying sword. Some of them even cried out in excitement. The unseen Lord broke through the sky. As it reappeared, it was already a few thousand miles away. The mortals couldn't see the trace in the blue sky with their naked eyes. Even the cultivation practitioners could only sense a slight disturbance in their Tao heart, and they couldn't see anything when they looked at it. The sword moved too fast. Shi Wang's son was a swordsman in the Broken Sea state, so he was very sensitive to the heavenly secrets. The moment he was about to kill the scholar Yin, he suddenly felt alarmed. As such, he rode the sword away without hesitation, not caring whether the sword could kill Lu Shui or not. The result of his divination was very clear. He knew that if he let the flying sword catch up to him, something big would happen. Though he reacted extremely fast, he still couldn't evade the flying sword. It was because the flying sword was unimaginably fast. He had seen many swordsmen in Chao over 10 years after he left the South Ocean, including a figure in the heavenly arrival state like his big brother. But he had never seen such a fast sword. The chaotic wind fell on his face, feeling a bit cold. Shi Wang's son knew he couldn't evade it, so he halted in the sky and turned around to look at the sword light. The bead curtain was swung up as he moved, exposing his nonchalant face. He wielded the first child sword with both of his hands toward the sword light. The bead curtain fell down slowly. It was soundless. In the rice field 100 miles west of Haizhou City, a farmer was weeding. He suddenly felt a bit nervous, either because it was too hot or because he had been working too hard. He returned to the side of the field and drank a few mouthfuls of cold water from the crock. However, he found that it did not alleviate the pain. He became more and more uneasy and subconsciously looked up at the sky. He found that the weather was quite good and there was no sign of storm. There were some dark clouds in the sky to the west, but the sky above the paddy field was clear and the sunlight was somewhat dazzling. Suddenly, he saw a bright light in the depths of the sky. Compared to the blazing sun, the light was not so striking, but the farmer was stunned because he was sure that it was very high. In such a clear sky, he could actually see that ray of light from so far away. He could imagine how dazzling it would be if he were to look at it from a close distance. He was afraid that it would blind him. 2 hours ago, a meteor shower streaked across the sky towards the west. Could this be one of the meteors that fell? Just as the farmer was thinking about this possibility, he suddenly heard a clap of thunder in his ears. The loud rumbling sound scared him so much that his legs turned to jelly, and he directly sat down in the field. Then, a gale came from the sky to the ground, rolling up countless sand and dust. The green seedlings in the paddy fields were forced to bend their waists. The farmer was so scared that he desperately ran home without picking up the water jug and tools beside the field. After running out of the paddy field and onto the road, he still felt that the fright had not subsided. Otherwise, why would his legs still be jelly and he could not stand steadily? The next moment, he realized that the reason why he could not stand steadily had nothing to do with his legs turning to jelly, but because the road was shaking. The thunder-like rumbling sound rang out again, but this time it was weaker and it sounded much closer, as if it was right on the ground. Countless cavalrymen in black armors rode on war horses that were also fully armored, galloping over. The magic army. The farmer was so shocked that he frantically ran down the road and back into the paddy field to avoid being run over by these cavalrymen. The smoke and dust gradually faded away. The blazing sunlight fell on the black iron armor, and it suddenly became a little colder, but it was still not as cold as the pair of eyes revealed through the armor. This commander was called Gu Pan, an external disciple of the Central State. He had a high position at a young age. According to his rank, he could lead 1,000 cavalrymen, but today he only brought 100 subordinates. In the early hours of the morning, tens of thousands of cavalrymen of the magic army entered Haizhou in several groups. The vanguard should have arrived in Haizhou by now and completed the encirclement. The mission of the magic army was to kill the highly achieved swordsmen of Bulow Lin, the devil men of the deviant sects, and the local officials affiliated with the Western Sea Sword School. In addition, they were responsible for maintaining the order in Haizhou and ensuring that the populace would not be harmed too much by the possible war. The mission of Gu Pan and the 100 cavalrymen of the magic army had nothing to do with these. Their mission was to find a sword. In the sky ahead of them, a thin black line was drifting down slowly, looking like a speck of dust. Gu Pan knew that it was the target of this trip, so he ordered in a deep voice, "Go there as fast as you can. Kill whoever dares to snatch it." The thin black line drifting down slowly in the blue sky was the first child sword. After being hit head-on by the invisible Lord Sword for many years, the first child sword, no matter how high its state was, had lost all of its spirituality, falling to the ground like a piece of scrap iron. Shi Wang's son was in an even worse situation. His 2 hands holding the hilt of his sword were covered in blood, and the bones of his fingers and arms were all shattered. He was extremely furious, calling the opponent's name in his mind. Pei Baifa, didn't my big brother severely injure you and lower your state? How come you still have the full power of the heavenly arrival state? Even if you have recovered your state through hard cultivation, how could you strike me from thousands of miles away from the longevity mountain? And how could this sword strike be so fast and so powerful? He didn't know why Pei Baifa's sword was so formidable, but he knew that he would die for sure if Pei Baifa's sword struck him again. Disregarding his own injuries, he flew to a higher altitude. A few seconds later, he passed the invisible barrier and entered the empty realm. There was no air in the empty realm, so he couldn't breathe. Of course, he was not an ordinary cultivation practitioner in the broken sea state, so he could stay here for a long time. The problem was that his arms had been chopped off by the invisible Lord Sword, so he couldn't repair his body by Zhen Yuan. In an environment like the empty realm, he would bleed more quickly, and it was possible that he would die soon. But he had to take the risk. If he didn't leave this place as soon as possible and go back to his manor cave to heal his wounds, he would die for sure. Shi Wang's sun flew toward the sky in the west. 2 streams of blood dripped down from his arms that were dragged behind him. Since there was no wind, the blood spread evenly, which was a beautiful scene. For him, this was the most horrible thing. He could even feel his life was fading away along with the blood. His face was pale, but his willpower didn't show any sign of dissipation. Any cultivation practitioner who could reach the state of the broken sea must be the most outstanding figure in the world. The word outstanding here referred to all aspects. The barrier between the empty realm and the sky was transparent, at least when looking down from the sky. There was a patch of dark clouds in front of him. Shi Wang's sun saw his shadow on the cloud. The shadow moved very fast, much faster than the average flying sword. Suddenly, he sensed an indescribable energy. The energy was powerful, but it didn't have any pressure, giving people a feeling that it was as deep as the ocean. Then he saw a shadow on the cloud. Chapter 256. No matter how fast or slow he was, the shadow always stayed in the same position, looking very relaxed. Shi Wang's sun's face turned paler. He looked behind him and found that it was empty. There was nothing there. That person was up there. Shi Wang's sun didn't look up. He suddenly changed his direction and flew toward the bottom of the empty realm, hoping to get into the cloud before the opponent attacked. The shadow didn't change, still following him on the surface of the white cloud. Shi Wang's sun was about to leave the empty realm, and the slightly moving clouds were right in front of him. He seemed to see hope. Soon, he found that the so-called hope was just an illusion. The shadow on the white cloud suddenly extended and became long and thin, like a sword. The sword formed by the shadow left the surface of the cloud and rolled towards Shi Wang's sun's body, like the dancing soul fire of the underworld or the tongue of a tortoise. Shi Wang's sun let out a shrill howl. Regardless of his injury, he forced all the Zhen Yuan out of his body and sped up, trying to escape from the empty realm. But there was nothing faster than a shadow in the world. With an oil lamp, the child could leave a shadow on the distant city wall with his finger, and then make the shadow move faster than the sword of the immortal Jingyan. The sword's shadow landed on Shi Wang's sun's body. Then, like a real rope, it coiled around him and lifted him up into the sky. Shi Wang's sun knew that there was a huge gap between their states, so he gave up resisting and looked up at the sky. The sky above the empty realm was colorless, like transparent glass, reflecting the sunlight and looking extremely bright. There was a dark shadow in the bright world. Even though the background was the boundless sky, the shadow was still extremely tall. Looking at the shadow, Shi Wang's sun's last bit of willpower melted, and he uttered the opponent's name as if he were moaning. Lusa, then he put on a self-mocking and bitter smile. Not wronged. Not wrong at all. And not dissatisfied. The 2 figures in the reaching heaven state attacked one after another. Who dared to be dissatisfied? On Longevity Mountain, the rainstorm had just stopped. Pei Yuan had returned to the manor cave quietly, ready to take out the treasures he had hidden for many years and leave. He thought that as the head of the disciplinary court and the elder brother of the sect master, who dared to stop him? Suddenly, the sound of swords rang out in the mountains, summoning all the disciples to the front of the hall for a discussion. Pei Yuan's expression changed slightly. He wanted to ignore it, but he hesitated when he sensed that the array formation around the mountain gate had become much sterner. In the end, he didn't dare to break into the mountain gate. He gritted his teeth and hid the treasures in the depths of the cave. Then, he rode his sword back to the square in front of the hall. The disciples of the No Mercy sect were quite excited. Even though they were all wet, they were still discussing the earlier scene. The palace door slowly opened, and Pei Baifa's figure appeared. Everyone knelt down on one knee and saluted loudly. "Greetings, sect master." Pei Baifa slowly walked up the 13 stone steps. After being washed by the rain, the crane relief on the stone steps looked even more lifelike. The awe-inspiring sword intent surrounded his body. As his feet landed, cracks appeared on the ground. The sword intent gradually faded. It was very quiet in front of the palace. Before the disciples could ask, Pei Baifa said with an indifferent expression, "The one I want to kill is Shi Wang's Sunday." The crowd knew that Shi Wang's son was an important figure of the Western Sea Sword School, and it was said that he was the young brother of Jian Shilai. They couldn't help but feel surprised, excited, and worried. The sword wielded by the sect master was indeed the invincible power of the heavenly arrival state. But did he want to wage a war against the Western Sea Sword School as soon as he came out from behind closed doors? They didn't think of this because they were afraid of the war with the West Ocean Sword School, but they were worried about the sect master's health. After the fight with the godly swordsman, the sect master couldn't see anything anymore. Though the outside world didn't know this, they knew it clearly. The elder asked uncertainly, "Is Shi Wang's son dead?" Pei Baifa didn't answer the question, saying, "You guys go to the Institute of White Deer and burn it down." He still didn't tell the crowd that the cloud platform of the Western Sea Sword School was the headquarters of Bulo Lin. Pei Yuan couldn't help but ask what happened. Pei Baifa asked while looking at him in the crowd, "What do you think?" Pei Yuan had a strange feeling even though he knew that Tian Jingren couldn't see him. Back then, someone told me that Tian Jingren was virtuous and trustworthy, and that he was blind, so it wouldn't hurt to see him. Pei Baifa said, "I believed him and went to the Institute of White Deer. Then I became blind. What's wrong with me burning that place down now?" He wanted to burn down the Institute of White Deer because of what had happened in the past. What would happen to that person then? Pei Yuan fled toward the outside of the valley before Pei Baifa could finish his words. Suddenly, a stream of blood spurted out. His right leg was cut off neatly from the knee, as if it had been cut off by a sword. Pei Baifa looked at him in the distance expressionlessly, his pale eyes emitting a glint as if he wanted to devour someone. Pei Yuan yelled in pain and crawled up from the ground, jumping forward with his left leg. The scene looked funny, but it was even more horrifying. Then, his left leg was cut off at the ankle. Pei Yuan couldn't walk anymore, not even jump. He sat in a pool of blood, crying in despair. "I never thought my brother would sell himself out, even though you have always been such a stupid and preposterous person." Pei Baifa looked at him expressionlessly and said, "It turns out that I've been blind for many years before I became blind." The small sword flew back from behind the cliff, its mirror-like blade reflecting the scene on the cliff. The dust-covered green trees, the mottled bloodstains, the pale face, and more tears on the gown. Lu Shui knelt in front of the old scholar, his expression very sorrowful. That sword had destroyed all signs of life. He liked this elder very much because he had helped him a lot and had spent a long time with him. But the old scholar had never told him his story, and it was not until today that Lu Shui learned that his surname was Yin. "If you have any last wishes, please say them. As long as I'm still alive, I will fulfill them for you." He looked at the old scholar and said. The old scholar shook his head. Lu Shui was somewhat anxious and said, "You are about to die. Why are you still unwilling to say it?" The old scholar didn't answer this question, saying, "After I die, someone will know and come here to investigate." You must leave as soon as possible, or else you will be in danger. Lu Shui didn't understand what he meant. This pen is for you. The old scholar handed the pen of the guard to Jing Jiao and said sentimentally, don't show yourself before this storm comes to an end. The world is too chaotic. The pen of the guard was the most precious treasure of Yamatsai. He gave it to Lu Shui so carelessly. Lu Shui took it over solemnly. The old scholar asked, the last thing I want to know is, that year before we left here, when you went to the forest to relieve yourself, was it to hide the first child sword? Yes, Lu Shui said. Interesting. I hope Shi Wang's son won't feel that his hands are dirty. The old scholar laughed, saying, I have one more thing to say. When a man is about to die, he will talk a lot. Lu Shui cried, saying, I also talk a lot. You have the devil fire, so you're naturally hot. So don't be too enthusiastic when doing things in the future, or you'll be burned to death. The old scholar looked at Jing Jiao and said seriously, even if you can't be burned to death, you will feel uncomfortable if you're too enthusiastic, just like I am now. He opened the fan and started fanning himself. The wind fell on his body, blowing away his clothes and body, causing them to fly up like ashes. Chapter 257. He had already turned into ashes. Lu Shui kowtowed a few times, and so did Xiao He. Lu Shui picked up the fan from the ashes and put it on his waist, looking at the short sword in the sky. The short sword flew to his front, its tip slightly drooping as if it was feeling sorry for itself, as if it felt useless. Lu Shui didn't say anything, but motioned for Xiao He to lie on his back. Xiao He shook her head, thinking that he was also badly injured. How could he carry her down such a steep cliff? The short sword fell on Lu Shui's hand, turning back into a bracelet. Lu Shui understood what it meant, so he carried Xiao He on his back. The bracelet flew up, pulling his arm, and drifted down the cliff. It didn't take long before a scholar flew in from the outside of the mountain and landed outside the manor cave. This scholar was also wearing a blue robe, but it was very new, as blue as the deep sea. This person looked gentle, but not weak. He had an extraordinary bearing, giving people a feeling of unfathomable depth. Looking at the ashes outside the manor cave, the scholar remained silent for a long time. Then he sighed and said, Have a safe journey, martial nephew. Having said that, he walked back to the cliff's edge, clasped his hands behind his back, and leaped in the air, flying toward the West Ocean. The surface of the sea outside Haizhou City was billowing like a pile of snow. Heaven and earth were filled with all kinds of energies, and the wind was howling incessantly. Hundreds of flying swords hovered in the wind, surrounding the cloud platform. Some distance away, there were countless cultivators riding on magic tools. The cloud that had never dispersed all year round finally changed today. Countless turbulence appeared on its surface, which was pulled by an invisible force toward the surface of the sea and the ground, looking like a tornado. When the cloud touched the ground, it became fog. Haizhou City and the surrounding villages were all shrouded in fog, blocking the mortal's sight. Only the wind and rain magic of Ozawa could create such a wonderful scene, and the person who could mobilize so many clouds and fog must be a real swordsman. The scholar flew in that direction while thinking about all these things. Regardless of whether it was the cultivators riding on their artifacts or the Aoyama disciples riding on their swords, they all made way and bowed. Those who didn't know the identity of the scholar couldn't help but find it strange. It was not until they heard the greetings that they realized this elegant scholar was actually the house master of Yamatsai, Bu Qiuxiao. Bu Qiuxiao came to the forefront. He looked at the middle-aged man who was deploying the wind-rain magic method in front of the cloud platform, thinking that it was indeed the commander of Ozawa who had joined the battle himself. On the mountain peak, the disciples of the Western Sea Sword School and the caretakers of the cloud platform were setting up the defensive formation in a hurry. It was evident that they were in a panic. Who could stay calm in front of such a formidable force? leader of Ozawa flew back to the front of the formation and asked, "Should we wait a bit longer?" The magic method of wind and rain consumed a great deal of his energy. Even he looked a bit pale. Bu Xiao didn't say anything, looking at Chun Yutian. Chun Yutian was the peak master of Bihu in Aoyama, having a similar status as leader of Ozawa, but he was still a bit inferior to the house master of Yamatai. The reason Bu Xiao asked Chun Yutian to make the decision was that the Aoyama sect was the main force in besieging the cloud platform today. To put it more precisely, it was the Aoyama sect who had initiated the attack. Wait, the West Ocean can't pretend to be dead all the time. Chun Yutian said this without hesitation. Hearing this, Bu Xiao let out a bitter laugh inside, knowing that he was right. The target of the Aoyama sect was not just the cloud platform. However, the Western Sea Sword School was very powerful. If an all-out war broke out, how many of the cultivation practitioners besieging the cloud platform would die? More importantly, if a figure like the godly swordsman of West Ocean got mad, even the immortal sect master of Aoyama would have to stay away from him. What should they do then? All of a sudden, 100 sword lights appeared on the other side of the ocean. The Western Sea Sword School had arrived. Even from a long distance, a highly achieved practitioner like Bu Xiao could judge the cultivation state of those people based on the sword lights. He had vaguely guessed what the Western Sea Sword School intended to do, so he sent a spiritual awareness to a spot in the sky. Those sword lights soon arrived in front of the cloud platform. The leader was Tong Lu, followed by 2 elders in the free travel state, and the rest of them were young disciples. Seeing this scene, Chun Yutian and the others felt odd. The Western Sea Sword School had enjoyed a great reputation over the years. Even though their resources were a bit inferior, they should have sent an elder in the Broken Sea state. Though Tong Lu was the personal disciple of the godly swordsman of West Ocean, he was still a young disciple. He didn't exchange pleasantries, nor did he bow to the masters and elders. Seeing the scene, Tong Lu was extremely angry, yelling, "What do you want to do?" Bu Xiao, Chun Yutian, and the others didn't respond to him. Guananshan arrived by riding his sword. Seeing the angry Tong Lu, a hint of sympathy flashed on his face. He was certain that Lu Shui didn't know what was going on based on the message he sent back. "Cultivationist Tong Lu, you should read these first." Guananshan opened his palm, revealing a bright pearl. A few surprised screams could be heard in the distance. It was the most precious treasure of the Zhongzhou school. Chapter 258. In the sky around the cloud platform, exclamations broke out one after another. The heavenly retrieval orb could reproduce the images and sounds perfectly, and it was impossible to fake it. It was a famous magic treasure in the cultivation world, and it had been hidden by the center sect on the Cloud Dream Mountain all these years. Why did it suddenly appear in the hands of Guananshan? Though the relationship between the Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school had eased, how could the 2 leaders of the cultivation world be so close to each other? Tong Lu thought of something, his face darkening. The 2 elders of the state of free travel exchanged a glance and also thought of the same thing, their faces grim. The Western Sea Sword School had always been on friendly terms with the Zhongzhou school. Today, they were relieved to see no disciples of the Zhongzhou school among the cultivation sects besieging the cloud platform. But the fact that the heavenly retrieval orb was in the hands of Guananshan indicated that the 2 sects had joined hands in secret. No matter how proud Tong Lu was, he was well aware that his own sect couldn't resist the alliance of the Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school. Not to mention that there were so many sects like Yamatai and Ozawa. Staring into Guananshan's eyes, he asked through gritted teeth, "What do you want me to see?" The heavenly retrieval orb shot out a few beams of light into the sky. The sun was setting, and the afterglow was thick. The picture was a bit blurry, but Lu Shui's face could still be vaguely seen. Perhaps it was because the fog on the ground was too thick, or it was the wind and rain magic of Ozawa, but the night fell much faster than usual. The picture became clearer and clearer. Many scenes appeared in the ever-changing picture, including Shi Wang's son and those jade scrolls. Along with these pictures, the voices from the heavenly retrieval orb appeared. Those conversations explained a lot of things. The beams of light were withdrawn, and the heavenly retrieval orb calmed down. Everything returned to darkness, except for the whistling of the sea breeze. The silence around the cloud platform lasted for a long time. Even those from the Orthodox sects besieging the cloud platform didn't know the details, and they were too shocked to speak. Staring into Guananshan's eyes, Tong Lu yelled angrily and emotionally with a pale face, "This is a false accusation." Guananshan looked at him sympathetically and said nothing. No one responded to Tong Lu, not even the disciples of the Western Sea Sword School. They were at a loss, wondering if what they were seeing was real. "Bilo Lin, our request is very simple. Hand over all the people whose names were called." Chun Yutian waved his right hand lightly, and several sword lights shot out from the flying sword under his feet. They traveled through the night sky at high speed, bringing with them bolts of lightning and forming several hundred names. Some of the names gradually dissipated, leaving behind more than 200 names, which were extremely eye-catching in the dark night sky. Tong Lu glanced at them and recognized that they were all experts from the Western Sea Sword School. The rest of them were probably deacons from the cloud platform. If the Western Sea Sword School handed over these people tonight, their strength would be reduced by more than half. More importantly, how could the Western Sea Sword sect establish itself in Chaotian in the future? What do those disappeared names mean? Tong Lu asked while suppressing his anger. Chun Yutian said, "Those people are the spies and devil men of the deviant sects planted by Bilo Lin in the imperial court and various cultivation sections. They are not here, so they are not part of our discussion." Tong Lu said, loudly while staring at him, "It's preposterous to expect us to believe what you said based on these scenes and sounds." Chun Yutian had no intention of discussing it with him, saying, "Hand them over right now. Otherwise, they would fight." Chun Yutian had been the peak master of Bihu for less than 10 years, and this was the first time he represented Aoyama in such a significant event. Normally, he should be a bit nervous. Yet, he was calm and confident, as if he wouldn't be afraid even if the godly swordsman of West Ocean showed up. It's always easy to find a reason to frame someone. Moreover, this is all Lu Shisui's one-sided statement. Tong Lu suddenly thought of this and said sharply, "We all know that he killed Lo Huainan. How can we believe what he said? This must be a scheme of Bilo Lin." This inference was not entirely unreasonable. The expressions on the faces of the cultivation practitioners surrounding the cloud platform changed slightly. It was then that a hole suddenly appeared in the night sky, and a person fell down from the dark clouds. That person wore a bright yellow cloth and had an extraordinary bearing. He was Shi Wang's Sunday. Tong Lu was startled, yelling, "Senior Master?" Not many disciples of the Western Sea Sword School knew Shi Wang's son, so they bowed to him in tandem upon hearing this. The disciples and caretakers on the cloud platform were delighted. All of a sudden, the crowd found something was wrong. There was blood on Shi Wang's son's body. He didn't come with his hands behind his back, but his arms were tied behind his back. Tong Lu was shocked, speechless. He looked behind Shi Wang's son and saw the rope with all his eyesight. That rope didn't have a tangible object, looking like a shadow. It was impossible to see it clearly in the dark night sky. There was an uproar. Both the disciples of the Western Sea Sword School and the disciples of various sects besieging the cloud platform. Shi Wang's son had always been mysterious, but everybody knew that his cultivation state was unfathomable. Yet, he was hung down from the sky. Who could do such a thing? Bu Qiuxiao's expression was calm. It was obvious that he had known this beforehand. He flew to the front of Shi Wang's son and said, "What's the point of killing more people? Those loyal subordinates don't know about it, but these young disciples of the Western Sea Sword School don't know about it. Do you want them to die with you?" The meaning of his words was clear. He hoped that Shi Wang's son would admit his crime to avoid the possible war. Shi Wang's son's bead curtain had been broken in half and was fluttering in the wind. It looked a bit weird, as if his eyes were about to be cut into pieces. His gaze swept over the cultivation practitioners around the cloud platform. He looked a bit tired, but his eyes were still deep. Finally, his gaze fell on Tong Lu and the other disciples of the Western Sea Sword School. You're right. I've been in charge of Bulo Lin these years. Hearing this, there was another uproar. The disciples of the Western Sea Sword School were shocked speechless, and the atmosphere became gloomy. Tong Lu's face was pale, and he couldn't believe what he had heard. The war hadn't even started, but their commander-in-chief had been captured and admitted his crime. How could they continue the war? Shiwang's son suddenly laughed. Why did he laugh? He stopped laughing and asked indifferently while looking at the crowd. But what's wrong with that? The crowd thought that this man must have lost his mind because he was too traumatized. Otherwise, how could he say such a thing? Guinan Shan said with furrowed brows, "You didn't even admit your mistake after doing such an evil thing. I really don't know what you're talking about." Shiwang's son said, "What I'm trying to say is that there are many people like me in your sections." Guinan Shan said, "Rest assured, we won't let any of them go." Shiwang's son looked at him and said sarcastically, "Are you sure that's all of them? They're just small fries. Do you dare to doubt your master?" Guinan Shan's expression changed slightly, and he said in a deep voice, "Don't try to mislead us with your fallacious words and sow discord." Shiwang's son's meaning was clear. There were many important figures in each sect who had connections with Bulo Lin. Did you dare to capture all of them? Guinan Shan's meaning was also clear. Since they were important figures in each sect, how could they join Bulo Lin as an assassin? Shiwang's son said indifferently, "Of course they won't be assassins. The problem is, for various reasons, they have many people they want to kill, but it's not convenient for them to do it themselves. So they have to ask us to do it. Are you sure you want me to tell you their names now?" His line of sight moved across the faces of the sect masters and elders like a knife. Bu Xiao noticed that 2 or 3 of the sect masters and elders had changed their expressions, so he knew that he couldn't let Shiwang's son continue. He glanced at Qin Yutian. Qin Yutian understood what he meant. He activated his sword awareness, and there was a faint flash of lightning between his right fingers. He was ready to employ the sword style of 8 sides at any time to shock the opponent to death with thunder. Shiwang's son suddenly turned his head and stared into his eyes, saying with a faint smile, "Maybe we should start with your Aoyama sect?" After a moment of silence, Chun Yutian put his right hand behind his back, wondering why his big brother sect master allowed this man to speak. Chapter 259. The waves were rising on the surface of the ocean, and it was pitch black. It seemed that a monster was hiding under the ocean, making people feel oppressed and even suffocated. Nobody spoke for a long time, because they didn't know how to answer Shiwang's son's question. Bu Xiao's voice rang out. "We use writing brushes, ink, paper, and inkstones in the house. Except for cooking, we never use knives." He flew to the front of Shiwang's son, looked at him, and said calmly, "You should know very well that I didn't buy a saber from you, and nobody in the house has ever bought a saber from you. So, am I qualified to ask you a few questions?" Shiwang's son said with a smile, "Though I don't have any proof, I know that Yamatai is not clean." Bu Xiao said indifferently, "Don't mention it if you don't have proof. Otherwise, we would have come here 10 years ago, and we wouldn't have to wait until today." Shiwang's son said sarcastically, "You have a point. Bulo Lin has existed for countless years. Why haven't you Orthodox sects done anything about it? Why do you have to do it now? You are just using it as an excuse to oppress our Western Sea Sword School. The cultivation circle is still the human world, and ugly things are inevitable. Everyone knows the reason why Bulo Lin has existed for so many years. The problem is that since you showed up more than 10 years ago, Bulo Lin's behavior has become more extreme. Not only did you collude with the deviant sects and devil men, you even tried to influence the war between the imperial court and the Snowy Kingdom. What's more unforgivable is that you dared to collude with the underworld. How can we let you live?" After answering Shiwang's son's question, Bu Xiao said no more. He looked at Tong Lu and other disciples of the Western Sea Sword School, saying, "Hand him over and surrender." The two elders of the Western Sea Sword School in the state of free travel looked at each other and were about to say something. Tong Lu looked at the elders of various sects and shouted sternly, "No, this is the place of our Western Sea Sword School. Even if what you said is true, you should ask my master to clean up the school instead of coming here today. What on earth do you want to do by doing this? Do you want to destroy our school?" Bu Xiao paid no attention to him. He gazed at the deep part of the ocean in the distance. He had already deduced a little about how the situation would develop today, but that person still hadn't appeared, so no one could be sure. Suddenly, a sword light came from the other side of the sea. It was finally here. Bu Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly. The sword light came very fast. In just an instant, it came from the depths of the sea to this place. It should be flying in the emptiness realm. There was an invisible barrier between the illusory realm and the real sky, but it couldn't cut off the connection between heaven and earth that responded to the sword light. The wind howled, and thousands of piles of snow appeared on the ink-black sea. The salty sea breeze was like a real rain of arrows, creating countless cracks in space. The hundreds of sword rays that were closest to the cloud platform started to shake. The Aoyama disciples could not control their swords steadily and quickly dodged to the side. Chun Yutian and Ozawa Ling stood at the forefront with a grave look on their faces. They were ready to strike, but were stopped by Bu Xiao. Bu Xiao kept retreating, and the disciples of Aoyama had already retreated more than 10 miles away. The night sky, which was densely covered with sword lights a moment ago, suddenly became much more spacious. The encirclement of the cloud platform had been lifted. The sword was so powerful even though it was concealed. Who else could it be except the godly swordsman of West Ocean? Facing such an absolute swordsman, it was meaningless to have more people. The will transmitted by the sword light was clear and powerful. "You are all ants." Tong Lu's face was no longer pale. The disciples of the Western Sea Sword School were like young animals who had found their home, showing the joy of surviving a disaster. The surprise screams broke out among the cliffs of the cloud platform. The sword light didn't stop there. It kept moving forward after arriving in the night sky above the cloud platform, heading toward the cultivation practitioners of various sections. More than 200 disciples of Aoyama formed a sword formation in front of the sword light. Bu Xiao and other swordsmen were drifting in the night sky. The disciples of various cultivation sects had a grave expression on their faces, waiting for the incoming attack. Just when everyone was feeling extremely nervous, the sword light suddenly halted and then dispersed. It seemed that a barrier had appeared in front of the sword light. The sword light dispersed like hot lava, flowing incessantly, illuminating the night sky of Haizhou City. The night sky was exceedingly bright, as if it were daytime again. The people could see clearly that there was a tall figure in front of the sword light. The figure reached out his right hand, and it seemed that he was holding a sword in his hand. The sword light from the West Ocean couldn't advance any further after encountering that person's hand, and had no choice but to disperse like the flowing water. Who could block the sword wielded by the godly swordsman of West Ocean with only one hand and one sword? Countless gazes were fixed on the sky, stunned speechless. Logically speaking, this battle between peerless experts had occurred in the distant Void Realm. With the eyesight of most of the cultivators present, they should not have been able to see it. However, at this moment, the sword light was too bright, and the figure was too clearly reflected. Was he the immortal sect master of Aoyama? The sword light returned to one person 100 miles away. It was none other than the godly swordsman of West Ocean. The two figures in the heavenly arrival state faced each other in the sky. More than 10 years ago, when the immortal Jingyang ascended from the Shinma peak of Aoyama, the godly swordsman of West Ocean came uninvited and was forced to retreat 3,000 miles away by the inherited heaven sword of the sect master of Aoyama. It seemed that the cultivation state of the sect master of Aoyama was even higher than that of the godly swordsman of West Ocean. But everybody knew that it was not the case because it was Aoyama. That day was the first time that these two swordsmen of the South fought, And it was also the first time that the swordsmen of the heavenly arrival state in Chaotian had fought each other in the last few decades. Judging from the current situation, their cultivation states were similar, and it was hard to tell who was stronger. The sword sect of Aoyama is just SOSO. A deep voice burst out from the ocean 100 miles away. The voice was devoid of any emotion, appearing exceedingly cold, and the coldness came from its self-confidence. The immortal sect master of Aoyama didn't respond. Over 100 sword lights broke through the sky and surrounded the cloud platform again, ready to strike at any moment. This was the response of the sect master of Aoyama. Even though he was the godly swordsman of West Ocean and could rival the immortal sect master, how could the disciples of the Western Sea Sword School be a match for the disciples of Aoyama? For elders in the Broken Sea State, a dozen elders in the Free Travel State in Guanan Shan, and nearly 200 disciples in the Undefeated State. What a formidable force it was! Even without the help of other sects, the Aoyama sect could wipe out the cloud platform, not to mention how many more highly achieved swordsmen were hiding on the Nine Peaks. Just SOSO? It was more than enough. The two important figures confronted each other in the high night sky. Hundreds of sword lights confronted each other on the surface of the ocean. The inky ocean was surging, and the atmosphere was extremely tense. All of a sudden, the inky ocean water flowed more rapidly, creating more sprays, and then separated to the sides, exposing a black bulge, like a mountain. As the ocean water flowed down, the scene became clearer. It was a skin with a black luster. A huge creature was hiding in the ocean water. Chapter 260. The cultivation practitioners had already guessed what the huge creature in the ocean was, and their faces grew unsightly. It must be the divine guardian animal of the Western Sea Sword School, the flying whale. That was why the godly swordsman of West Ocean was so nonchalant and confident in the face of such a dangerous situation. It turned out that this huge animal had been hiding at the bottom of the ocean, ready to fight at any moment. The mountain-like flying whale often flew over the surface of the ocean near Haijo City. Every year during the Four Seas banquet, it would spit out the seawater as a welcoming rain and a rainbow to welcome the guests. Though it was not mysterious, it didn't mean that it was not formidable. The flying whale waved its fins slowly, rising up to the surface of the ocean along with the waves a few thousand feet high. A great amount of seawater poured down from the smooth back of the whale, forming innumerable waterfalls. The sound of the waterfalls was as loud as the thunder. It was a magnificent scene. The flying whale left the surface of the ocean, heading toward the sky along with a great amount of watery mist. Its huge body moved at high speed, squeezing out a great deal of air and creating a violent wind. It came to a distance of 10,000 feet from the surface of the ocean. It opened its huge mouth, which looked like a black hole, and let out a deep roar toward the east. The salty and fishy ocean wind struck the disciples of Aoyama like knives. Many of them couldn't stand steadily. The sword lights surrounding the cloud platform were swaying incessantly, like a small boat in the middle of the ocean, on the verge of being destroyed at any moment. The dark clouds dispersed, and the starlight shone down on the huge black body of the flying whale, reflecting a faint glow, looking like a real mountain. It was even bigger than the cloud platform without the cloud clothes, casting a huge shadow on the surface of the ocean. This shadow also appeared in the minds of the cultivation practitioners of various sects besieging the cloud platform. The roar of the flying whale grew louder, echoing over the surface of the ocean like thunder along with the whistling wind, full of anger and the desire to kill. In the next moment, a great deal of seawater came out from its nostrils, turning into a rainstorm as it fell down. In the rainstorm, the disciples of Aoyama tried their best to control their flying swords, their expressions grave and uneasy. The disciples of other sects were further away, but they were more fearful. A disciple of the mirror sect fell off the flying mirror after being disturbed by the roar of the flying whale. If he hadn't been rescued by a sword light, he would have fallen into the ocean. Falling from such a high place into the ocean, even a cultivation practitioner would die for sure. Thinking of what the godly swordsman of West Ocean said, many people understood more about it. Aoyama's sect was indeed strong, but they were outside of Haijo City, which was the territory of Western Sea Sword School. The Western Sea Sword School had hidden the flying whale in the sea in advance, and it suddenly appeared at this time to frighten everyone. The flying whale was the guardian divine beast of the Western Sea Sword School, with a body as huge as a mountain and a formidable pressure. In terms of state, the flying whale was probably at the peak of the Broken Sea realm, maybe even half a step away from the heavenly arrival realm. The sect master of Aoyama had to keep an eye on the godly swordsman of West Ocean, but who would block the flying whale? The peak master of Bihu, Chun Yutian, had just entered the Broken Sea state a few years ago, and the other three elders were also in the initial stage of the Broken Sea state. Even if the Ozawa Ling was slightly stronger, there was no way he would be a match for this flying whale. The gap between the half-step to the heavenly arrival state and the common Broken Sea state was too wide. Standing in a rainstorm and looking at the huge flying whale in front of him, Buqiuxiao was thinking about what he should do next to irritate the flying whale and make it stay away from him. The flying whale was too big, like a real black mountain. If he fought with it here, the regular cultivation practitioners would be affected regardless of whether he won or lost. Especially those disciples in a lower cultivation state. Many of them would die. He could only hope that the divine beast of the Western Sea Sword School had a weak spiritual awareness. Otherwise, it would be troublesome later on. Thinking of this, he couldn't understand why the Aoyama sword sect sent out so many disciples in the undefeated state. It was well known that it was not a simple task of purging demons and demons. The young disciples participating in the battle could increase their knowledge, temper their Tao hearts, and absorb experience. Tonight was the true battle of the sects, which was too dangerous for these young disciples. At least, they shouldn't have shown up at the very beginning. It took Buqiuxiao a short while to ponder all this. He stood up, ready to deal with the flying whale for a while. It was then that he sensed something, and his expression changed slightly. He lifted his head to look at the high night sky. A great amount of seawater came out from the flying whale's nostrils, falling down like a rainstorm, diluting the starlight. All of a sudden, countless strands of rain broke apart and turned into pieces. Every piece of transparent raindrop bloomed under the influence of an invisible force, turning into a snowflake. The rainstorm turned into a heavy snowflake. The night sky suddenly became extremely cold. Looking at the snowflakes in the night sky, the cultivation practitioners were shocked speechless. They were impervious to cold and heat, but why did they feel a bone-piercing cold? A small black dot appeared in the swirling snowflakes. It was a man in black. The snowflakes were falling fast. The man in black came fast. His legs were surrounded by the residual light of thunder and lightning. Did this man come from the thunder region? The man in black landed on the back of the flying whale. Compared to the mountain-like body of the flying whale, he was like a speck of dust, but he seemed heavier than the sky. The flying whale let out a reluctant roar and sank down a few thousand feet. It waved its two fins, creating two gusts of fierce wind. It wanted to stay in the air, but found it impossible to do so. It wanted to shake the man in black down by rolling its body, but found it couldn't do so. The snowstorm continued to fall, falling around the man in black. Soon, the back of the flying whale was covered with a layer of snow, and it was extremely cold. The residual light of thunder and lightning around the man in black also entered the body of the flying whale through his feet. Muffled sounds came from the huge body of the flying whale. Was that the residual power of the heavenly thunder? Its body was enduring unimaginable coldness, and its body was filled with a violent aura. The flying whale couldn't bear it anymore. It let out a painful cry and fell toward the surface of the sea. The flying whale was the guardian divine beast of the Western Sea Sword School and was regarded as a teacher by the young disciples. Apart from being in awe of it, they were also very close to it. Seeing this scene, everyone was furious. They wanted to save it, but they couldn't get close to the snowstorm. A loud bang resounded. The mountain-like flying whale fell into the sea, causing huge waves as tall as a mountain. The terrifying waves slammed toward the shore, smashing the rocks and collapsing the cliffs. The coastline that stretched for hundreds of miles was destroyed beyond recognition. The dilapidated sea god temple also collapsed, submerged by the surging seawater that was dozens of feet high. When the tide receded, there was nothing left. There was an earthquake in Haijo City. Many houses cracked and collapsed. The man in black stood on the back of the flying whale, looking toward the west with his hands folded behind his back. The voices of the disciples of Aoyama could be heard in the night sky. Greetings, Sword Justice. It turned out that the man in black was the Sword Justice of Aoyama and the master of Shanghai Peak, Yuan Shijing. The wind and snow died down, and heaven and earth returned to quietness. Besides the sound of the ocean waves, no other sound could be heard. Yuan Shijing looked at the spot where the godly swordsman of West Ocean was 30 miles away, saying nothing. Yet, what he was about to say had already been heard by the whole heaven and earth. The Aoyama sect was indeed mediocre. They were merely two swordsmen in the heavenly arrival state. Yet, in all of Chaotian, there was no other place except for the Zhongzhou school. Chapter 261. Two swordsmen in the heavenly arrival state of Aoyama had arrived. What could the Western Sea Sword School do? The figure in the heavenly arrival state 100 miles away had made his own response. He wielded another sword by the seashore. That sword light was brighter and more formidable than before, as if it would seize the power of heaven and earth. It rose up like a rock, soon passing through the empty realm and disappearing without a trace. It should have entered the Thunder region. Was it possible that the godly swordsman of West Ocean would use his sword to attract the heavenly thunder and fight against two swordsmen in the heavenly arrival state at great risk? Countless gazes were fixed on the deep end of the night sky. The cultivation practitioners were waiting nervously for that sword light to reappear with various emotions. Standing on the back of the whale, Yuan Shijing looked at the night sky with his hands folded behind his back, remaining silent. The wind, snow, and rainstorm had all ceased, and the starlight shone down again. The tall figure standing in the empty realm didn't make any move. What was Yuan Shijing waiting for? What was the immortal sect master of Aoyama waiting for? Why didn't they strike earlier? Bu Qiuxiao felt a little moved. He looked at Shi Wang's son, who was bound by the sword shadows 1,000 feet away. Though Shi Wang's son was severely wounded and pale, he still maintained a dignified expression. Yet his eyes were not gloomy and profound anymore, but full of mockery. Bu Qiuxiao suddenly understood, and yelled to the cultivation practitioners nearby, "Stay back." No sooner had he said this than the sword light returned to the human world. Hiss! The sky seemed to be cut open. A sword light fell down like lightning along with the starlight pouring down, illuminating the whole cloud platform. Countless surprise screams broke out in the night sky around the cloud platform. It was because they had seen an incredible scene. It was quiet in Aoyama. The great formation was closed, and the thunder and lightning on the top of Bihu Peak disappeared without a trace. As a result, the girls on Qingrong Peak couldn't see the rainstorm anymore. All the disciples of Aoyama above the undefeated state had gone to the West Ocean, save for Nan Wang and the other peak masters, the elders and disciples were behind closed doors. Though the low-level disciples below the undefeated state didn't know the details, they could guess that something significant must have happened. They were either worried or nervous, so they had no interest in practicing the sword work. The 9 peaks were naturally quiet, and so was Shima Peak. Other than the sound of tea boiling in the iron kettle, there was no other sound. Jing Jiu was lying on the bamboo chair, holding a teacup and looking into the distance. From time to time, he would take a sip. No one knew what he was thinking. Zhao Liu, Gu Qing, and Yuan Chu looked at his back and then shook their heads. They really didn't know what he was thinking. The situation in the West Ocean must be very tense. As long as Lu Shui, who caused the incident, did not return to Aoyama, it should be very dangerous. Why was Jingjiu not worried? This was because they did not know about the deal between the sect leader and Jingjiu. Jingjiu asked Thoughtless Sword to go to the foreign land, to ask the giant friend to keep an eye on the archipelago that was locked by the thick fog. The head immortal had to ensure the safety of Lu Shui. The giant had taken a 10,000-year-old tree from the secret realm of Singing Spring and was now staring at the fog sleepily. In Jingjiu's eyes, Lu Xi was taking care of Lu Shui, the lone sword and the jasmine flower. If something bad happened to Lu Shui, it would be a sign that this little guy had terrible luck. He forgot that Lu Shui's luck had always been bad. He did not expect that Lu Shui did not go straight back to Aoyama after leaving Bulolin, but went to get the sword instead. As for the outcome of the battle between the Aoyama sect and the Western Sea Sword School, he was not very concerned because he did not need to worry. Why? Hearing Yuan Chu's question, Jingjiu handed the teacup to Gu Qing and said, "Because two heavenly arrival masters are one more than one." This was nonsense. It could also be said that it was common sense in mathematics that even children would find boring. The reason why nonsense was called nonsense was that it was self-evident. It was a self-evident principle, and it was usually irrefutable. The simplest common sense in mathematics was often the most irrefutable. Yuan Chu touched his head, thinking that it was indeed reasonable. Gu Qing was somewhat surprised, asking, "Did the immortal sect master and the sword justice both go there?" Zhao Liu wondered why Jingjiu and herself went to invite the Lord White Ghost from Bihu Peak if that was not the case. Thinking of this, she glanced at the white cat by the cliff's edge and asked Jingjiu, "The West Sea also has a divine beast guarding the sect, the flying whale we saw." Jingjiu said, "That whale is a fake heavenly arrival master, and the name Yuan Qijing is the bane of it." Gu Qing was startled for a moment, then understood what he meant after thinking for a while, and couldn't help but laugh. Yuan Chu touched his head again, thinking that it did not make sense. The white cat listened to their conversation while crouching by the cliff's edge, thinking that what they said was interesting and reasonable. How could that stupid big guy be mentioned in the same breath as him? He reached out his right paw and pulled Cold Cicada back to his side, yawning. It was late in the spring, and the weather was getting warmer, so the white cat liked sleeping with Cold Cicada more and more. As for whether Cold Cicada was willing to do it or not, and how many bottles of cold chalcedony the Shima Peak had to spend on it, it had never been the cat's concern. I still don't think it makes sense. Gu Qing washed Jingjiu's teacup, replaced it with a new one, and continued. Even though it has some benefits for the Western Sea Sword School, it is still too small compared to the risks, unless they want to change the structure of the whole cultivation world. What he meant was that the Western Sea Sword School controlled Bulolin in secret. Zhao Liu said, "It's evident that this is their goal. Otherwise, they would never be able to surpass Aoyama." Many years ago, the Western Sea Sword School rose rapidly on the seashore. What they had done since then, anyone could tell that their goal was the Aoyama sect. But where did the hostility of the Western Sea Sword School toward Aoyama come from? Or in other words, the strong desire to surpass it? Was it because the godly swordsmen of West Ocean didn't want to be inferior to others? Zhao Liu couldn't answer this question, so she looked at Jingjiu. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu fixed their gazes on Jingjiu as well. Jingjiu drank the tea with his head lowered, pretending that he didn't know anything. Zhao Liu and the other two looked at him like that. It was quiet on the peak top for a long time. Jingjiu put down the teacup. Gu Qing took it from him hastily. Feeling a bit helpless, Jingjiu said, "This is a long story. It's too tiring to tell." Yuan Chu let out a cheer, ran into the manor cave, and brought out 3 brocade stools. Zhao Liu gestured that she didn't need them, and asked Jingjiu to move his seat, and sat down on the bamboo chair. The white cat wasn't interested, and went back to sleep while holding Cold Cicada. He already knew what had happened, so there was no need for him to listen to it again. This is how the story begins. Jingjiu said, Many years ago, a boat came from the ocean loaded with spices, jewels, crystals, and a youth. The youth was Nanshu, a prince of a small country in the South Ocean. He came to Chaotian from a long distance because he wanted to join the Aoyama sect. He had an excellent talent in cultivation, so he entered the inner gate easily. He was wanted by all the peaks at the inherited sword competition, but he didn't want to be his disciple, claiming that he only wanted to be the disciple of the immortal Daoyuan, the sect master at the time. The immortal Daoyuan said that he had too strong a murderous nature, so he couldn't even practice the true swords of Aoyama, to say nothing of taking him as his personal disciple. The immortal Daoyuan said that he had too much of a murderous nature, so he couldn't even practice the true swords of Aoyama. The immortal Daoyuan said that he was willing to take him to the Guechang temple to cultivate. Nanshu was unwilling to do so. He left Aoyama angrily and traveled all over the land. He encountered some tragic events, and his temperament became more extreme. Later, he found the manor cave of a fairy swordsman of the previous generation on an island in the ocean and obtained the inheritance. His cultivation state improved by leaps and bounds, and it took him 200 years to reach the upper limit of the heavenly arrival state, becoming a fairy swordsman of the generation. After he returned to Chaotian, he killed many disciples of Aoyama in order to avenge what he had done to him, and he succeeded in sneak attacking the immortal Daoyuan while he was ascending with the help of the demons of the underworld. The immortal Daoyuan was severely wounded and failed in his ascension. Before his death, he employed the all-in-one sword to cut down Nanshu's Dao tree from 10,000 miles away, and at the same time activated the great formation of Aoyama to kill him. Nanshu saw that the situation was unfavorable for him, so he activated the great formation to confine the island where the manor cave was located in the ocean fog. Jingzhu didn't know how to tell a story, so he didn't use any flowery words, and the plot was not interesting either, but Zhao Liu, Gu Qing, and Yuan Chu listened to him attentively, and then felt startled. They, of course, knew who Jingzhu was talking about. The legend of the hidden swordsman was one of the most famous stories in the cultivation world of Chaotian. It was not until today that they learned that the fairy swordsman in the heavenly arrival of the South Sea and the Aoyama sect had many grudges, and it was the first time they learned his name. The immortal Daoyuan was the sect master of Aoyama many years ago. In terms of seniority, he should be the Grand Master of Taiping Jinren and the immortal Jingyang, but he died after failing in his ascension. It turned out that the reason for his failure was that the fairy swordsman in the heavenly arrival of the South Sea was the reason why the Aoyama sect swore to kill him. Chapter 262. Today is the Dragon Boat Festival. I wish everybody a happy holiday. A TV play will be shown on Aichi at 8 o'clock in the evening, which is called I'm Willing to Love the Whole World for You. This film is adapted from the story of the third young master and the third young mistress. Our friends are familiar with the story, but I'm sure you don't know about it. Remember to watch it on time if you're curious. The story was not over yet. It was merely the beginning. Thinking of what had happened in the past, Jingzhu fell silent for a long time. The Grand Master went to the Hermit Peaks after passing the position of the sect master of Aoyama to his master in preparation for his ascension. Unexpectedly, the Grand Master failed in his ascension because of Nanshu's sneak attack, and so did his master. As a result, Jingzhu and his big brother were the only two people left on this branch. He and his big brother had a hard time in those years. To say nothing of the position of the sect master, they had almost taken away the position of the sect master from them. Later, his big brother was expelled from the mountain gate. Of course, it was not true that he was expelled from the mountain gate. It was like the story of Lu Shui, except that his big brother went to the underworld. In the end, like Lu Shui, he had accomplished his task and returned to Aoyama. Under such circumstances, the other peaks didn't let down their guard. They even criticized his big brother for some incidents. He hoped that Lu Shui wouldn't encounter the same problem after he came back. Shangda Peak kept a low profile at the time. His big brother, Yuan Qijing, and Lu Xi had eaten hot pot for many years and played mahjong once in a while, until they reached the heavenly arrival state and broke through the sea-breaking state. His big brother had finally taken back the position of the sect master of Aoyama. In fact, he didn't know what had happened in those years. He had been concentrating on cultivation and had never left Shangda Peak. He had seldom come out of that coal manor cave. Only when his big brother said he was going to kill some people did he leave the manor cave with Yuan Qijing and Lu Xi to kill some people. In retrospect, they had indeed killed many people in order to stabilize the situation on the 9 peaks of Aoyama. As for why they killed those people, he had never asked. His big brother wouldn't kill people randomly. It was ironic. And then, Yuan Shu's question made Jing Jiu wake up from his rare memories. He resumed the story. What happened after that was just my guess. Nanshu's Dao tree had been destroyed, and the world had been sealed off by the sea mist. Even if he could recover from his injuries, he had no hope of ascending, so he desperately wanted to leave. Because of the Aoyama sect, he did not dare to leave the mist. However, he could send someone to leave and think of a way to destroy the Aoyama sect. Then, he would be able to leave. This would take a long time, hundreds of years, or even longer, but what cultivators had the most was time. The first people to leave the island were his boys. The child called himself Tian Jingren after he came to Chao Tian, and he was looking for a suitable disciple for Nanshu. There was a youth named Jian Shilai. He had a high talent in the sword work, but he was refused by the No Mercy sect for some reason, so he was resentful. Tian Jingren suddenly realized that this experience was quite similar to Nanshu's. He found Jian Shilai, gave him the token, and instructed him to go overseas to the Foggy Island and take Nanshu as his master. Of course, it was also possible that Tian Jingren gave Nanshu's magic method to Jian Shilai. That youth mastered the sword work and founded the Western Sea Sword School. He carried out the will of the masters and attempted to destroy Aoyama. However, he found that the Western Sea Sword School would never be able to catch up with Aoyama no matter how fast it developed. So he had to find another way. One year, he obtained the control of Bulow Lin by some unknown means. The assassins in Bulow Lin started to use the sword 100 years ago. It must have been at that time. The orthodox cultivation sects, especially Aoyama, had been suspicious of his origin, but they didn't have any proof. As such, when Liang Wang Peak plotted this scheme, those masters who knew the truth didn't have much hope, but they didn't try to stop it either. They just went along with the flow, because it was not a loss to them anyway. Jing Jiu said, "Unexpectedly, this guy Sure Sui has found something, and he has become what he is today. Big Brother is really outstanding," Yuan Shu praised. Jing Jiu didn't know what he and Gu Qing had talked about in private, so he didn't understand what Jing Jiu and Gu Qing had said, saying, "He is indeed outstanding, but it doesn't mean much. It's because Jian Shilai won't leave any chance for us." Zhao Liu didn't think of all this, but Gu Qing reacted quickly, asking in surprise, "Master, do you mean that he will cut off his arm to survive?" Jing Jiu said, "It's rare for Aoyama to find an opportunity to kill him justifiably. What else can he do but do it?" Yuan Shu asked with widened eyes, "Is the godly swordsman of West Ocean. How could he be killed so easily?" Jing Jiu said, "It's indeed difficult. That's why Aoyama has deployed such a large force to force him to retreat. After this battle, the Western Sea Sword School will be destroyed." Zhao Liu felt more surprised after hearing this, saying, "I thought you didn't know about these things." Jing Jiu didn't say anything more. Though Jing Jiu talked more after he returned to Aoyama, he still didn't talk much. Besides the long conversation with Zhao Liu in Zhaoga City, Jing Jiu talked the most that day. Zhao Liu understood now. It was because he was too lazy to think about it before, but it was not because he couldn't figure it out. Gu Qing asked, "Who is that Shiwang's son?" It said that he is the young brother of Jian Shilai. Is he also the disciple of Nanshu? Zhao Liu glanced at Jing Jiu, recalling the event when she went to Haizhou City. Jing Jiu went to see Shiwang's son that time, but he was disappointed when he saw him, because he was certain that Shiwang's son was not the person he was looking for. Jing Jiu remained silent. This was something he couldn't figure out. Why did someone like Shiwang's son suddenly appear more than 10 years ago? His big brother had already left Aoyama at that time. Was there any connection between the two events? Where did Shiwang's son's trust in Lu Shui come from? Did this event have something to do with his big brother? Yuan Chu said, "No matter what, Shiwang's son will die this time. Bulo Lin will be wiped out, and the deviant sects will be on the decline. I think the cultivation circle will be peaceful for many years." Hearing the word peaceful, Zhao Leu glanced at Jing Jiu again. Jing Jiu was fully aware that even if the orthodox cultivation circle won the battle, they would only eliminate the middle and low-level members of Bulo Lin. Lu Shui had no chance of contacting those truly dangerous figures. For instance, the person who might show up that day. As time went by, the twilight turned into the night. The stars were looking at the peaks quietly. It was the most intense moment in the sky above the ink sea outside Haizhou City. The sect master of Aoyama and Yuan Qijing had shown up one after another. Standing by the cliff's edge, Jing Jiu thought that this would be the moment that person would show up. As he was thinking of this, a powerful energy arrived at Shenma Peak. The forbidding formation on Shenma Peak had sensed it. Hundreds of sword wheels shot up into the sky, but they couldn't force the person hiding in the darkness of the night to show up. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu sensed the change of the formation. They came to the cliff's edge as quickly as they could, looking at the night sky. Chapter 263. Shenma Peak had an inhibition formation that isolated it from the outside world. After Zhao Leu challenged the peak, this powerful inhibition formation was only left on the peak and was occasionally activated. For example, when Jing Jiu and Zhao Leu traveled around the world, and today and every day when the white cat was sunbathing, people outside couldn't see what was happening on the peak, but people on the peak could see the sky. Jing Jiu looked at the stars in the night sky, felt the aura, and thought about what the other party would do. The aura was very peaceful, but its inner quality was extremely powerful, like two silver eyebrows dancing in the wind, old but not weak. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu also felt the faint, powerful pressure, and they were a little nervous. Aoyama formation was hidden among the peaks, and even the headmaster of Zhongzhou School couldn't break it. How could the other party appear so close to the top of Shenma Peak? Could it be a senior from the Nine Peaks? Thinking of this possibility, Gu Qing and Yuan Chu's expressions changed again. Zhao Leu walked out of the cave residence. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu looked at her. Zhao Leu shook her head. Yuan Chu was a little surprised, thinking that the great ancestor was indeed lazy and sleepy. But why didn't he come out at this time? Jing Jiu looked at the night sky, was silent for a while, and suddenly reached out his right hand. Zhao Leu summoned the Thoughtless Sword. The Thoughtless Sword flew to Jing Jiu's hand by itself. Jing Jiu held the sword, inserted it into a very small crack on the cliff, and then turned it slightly. Several cracking sounds, like a dozen glass cups falling on the hard ground one after another, broke into pieces. The inhibition formation on the peak was lifted, and hundreds of sword wheels returned to the mountain. Zhao Leu was a little surprised, walked to him, and looked at the night sky. The powerful aura was still hidden in the night and didn't show itself. Jing Jiu looked at a spot in the night sky, saying nothing. The night wind caressed the treetops between the mountains, making a rustling sound. The monkeys didn't scream, and neither did the cicadas. It was even colder. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu looked at the backs of the two teachers, feeling very nervous. They knew that in a battle of this level, it was meaningless for them to make a move. As time passed, the situation remained unchanged, until a certain moment, the aura suddenly disappeared. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu couldn't be sure, so they waited anxiously. "Let's go." Jing Jiu turned around and walked into the cave. Zhao Leu looked at his back and wanted to persuade him, but in the end, she didn't say anything. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu were finally relieved. Only then did they feel that their legs were a little weak and their clothes were already wet with sweat. In the depths of the cave, There was a cold jade couch that emitted a faint chill. It was probably because Jingjio didn't like the cold that he had never rested here. In fact, he seldom came here. Walking to the front of the cold jade couch, Jingjio looked at the white cat sleeping soundly while holding Cold Cicada. Sensing Jingjio's will, Cold Cicada crawled out from between the cat's paws gingerly and crawled to a corner. The white cat sensed Jingjio's will. He reached out his right paw to grab Cold Cicada, but he grabbed nothing. He opened his eyes slowly, looking around in bewilderment. Cold Cicada was hiding in a corner, and Sensei was trembling. The cat was of course afraid of this long-haired monster, but he didn't dare disobey Jingjio's will. "Stop pretending," Jingjio continued while looking at the cat. "The forbidding formation will be activated every time you come out of the cave. Nobody can see you except for Lu Ci and Yuan Qijing." The white cat looked at Jingjio in silence, no longer bewildered, and no emotion could be seen in his eyes. "I've spent 3 years planning this scheme, but he didn't do anything." Back when the manor cave of the fake Jingyang was opened, Jingjio was certain that the master of Shilai Peak, Fong Jingtian, had something to hide. Later, in the old plum garden of Zhaoga City, Tian Jingrun attacked him as proof. In Fong Jingtian's eyes, he and Zhao Liu were both investigating the ascension of the immortal Jingyang. As such, the so-called personal disciple was most likely his personal disciple. In order to conceal something, Fong Jingtian had enough reasons to eliminate Jingjio and Zhao Liu, and in fact, he had already tried twice. Fong Jingtian was a swordsman in the upper state of the Broken Sea, and he was probably the third most powerful swordsman of the Aoyama sect. It was a great pressure to be watched by such a figure. Jingjio was very weak at the moment, so he didn't have a good way to deal with this problem, but he still wanted to try to eliminate this threat. So he brought White Ghost back from Bihu Peak 3 years ago. He knew that Lu Ci and Yuan Qijing would leave Aoyama after the incident at the Western Sea Sword School, and the ghost in Fong Jingtian's heart might come out again. If Fong Jingtian tried to kill him again, he would use the restrictive formation of Shenma Peak and White Ghost to counterattack. Fong Jingtian came tonight as expected. Unexpectedly, he didn't attack. There was only one explanation for it. Fong Jingtian knew the arrangement of Shenma Peak in advance. The white cat narrowed his eyes, indicating that it had nothing to do with him. If it wasn't him, then it would be the sect master or Yuan Qijing. Jingjio didn't completely believe it, because it didn't attack tonight, and also because of what he had said when he went to Bihu Peak for the first time. If White Ghost didn't agree or acquiesced, even the Peak Master of Bihu couldn't take away a piece of Thunder Soul Wood. Of course, in addition to the ghost in Fong Jingtian's heart and this White Ghost, there must be other ghosts in the 9 Peaks. Senior Brother could only break the restrictive formation set by sending his spirit to the disciple of the underworld through the Thunder Soul Wood. But he still needed other help to leave the sword jail. Who was that person? He left the cave residence and walked back to the cliff. Looking at the snowy cliff between Shangda Peak illuminated by starlight, he fell silent for a long time. "You have crawled back from hell. How can a sword jail keep you in? Should I have just killed you back then?" After Nanjung escaped from her tribe, she joined Bulo Lin because cultivators needed a lot of resources, which she didn't have. In Bulo Lin, she had killed a lot of people and seen many horrible scenes. It was like hell, but that was just watching. Tonight was the first time she walked in it. Tonight, the hell was covered by a thick layer of fog. She knew it was the wind and rain magic of Ozawa. It was this fog that blocked her and her companions from sending out distress signals to the night sky. The sound of fighting could be heard everywhere in the fog. Occasionally, there would be a flash of light, illuminating the dark cliff. Then, there would be screams and groans, which meant death. From her side came the faint sound of hoofs. She knew it was the magic guards of the imperial court. It was these cavalrymen who killed her red elephant. The cavalrymen, made up of ordinary people, became very powerful after sticking talismans on them. Those seemingly fragile arrows became extremely hard after being stuck on the talismans. Even a cultivator like her couldn't bear it. What was more troublesome was that she and her companions met a few scholars of Yamatai. How could those scholars look like scholars? They were all lunatics. Tu Chio was dead. Yibu Huan was also dead. The former's boxing gloves and the latter's barren vase were tied around her waist, and the greenstone zither was carried on her back. If she attacked now, she should be able to kill many cavalrymen of the magic guards. But she didn't even think about it. She just wanted to escape. Escape out of the fog. The farther the better. Finally, she broke through the clouds and came to the peak. It was a nameless mountain outside Haijo City. Lightning illuminated the world. She looked back and found that it was the cloud platform. A beam of sword light emerged from the sea. It entered the sky. She returned to the human world again. Her face became extremely pale. She didn't know if this was the most shameless murder in the history of the cultivation world. Chapter 264. That sword light illuminated the world above the clouds. Nan Zheng saw the hanging mountain in the night sky, and she knew it was the cloud platform. She should have been quite familiar with the hanging mountain, because she had been there many times over the years. But it was the first time she had seen its true appearance. She knew that this was probably the last time she would see it. The sword light that had broken through the sky and struck down toward the hanging mountain. All the formations on the cloud platform had been activated when the enemies came. They reacted automatically when they encountered the sword light, but they couldn't block it for even a moment. Along with an unimaginably loud boom, the grand hall on the peak top was cut in half by the sword light, turning into countless wood chips and pebbles, shooting up in all directions. That grand hall was the place where Jing Jiao and Zhao Liu had been. The winners of the Four Seas banquet would be received and rewarded by Shiwang's son here every year. It was conceivable that many things would change irreversibly, regardless of whether there would be another Four Seas banquet after tonight. The sword light continued downward after cutting the grand hall in half, penetrating deep into the mountain. Along with the ear-piercing sounds of friction and cutting, a straight crack appeared on the cliff, countless pebbles and dust shooting out from the crack. The halls and formations on the hanging mountain were broken into pieces by the sword light, as fragile as the colored glass. The sounds of friction and cutting grew more and more ear-piercing and unpleasant to hear, and then grew deeper, like the roar of a real dragon. The crack grew deeper and deeper, and a great deal of sand and pebbles dropped down to the surface of the ocean. The hanging mountain had gradually been cut in half, on the verge of collapse. All this happened in a very short period of time. The fleeing figures could be seen everywhere amidst the scattering dust and smoke on the cloud platform. Countless terrified screams and miserable screams could be heard from all over the mountain. The disciples of Aoyama and the cultivation practitioners of other sects in the night sky were shocked speechless. The most shocked were the disciples of the West Ocean, led by Tong Lu. Looking at the scene in front of them with pale faces, they wondered what their master intended to do, and whether he intended to destroy the cloud platform themselves. The cloud platform was an important place for the Western Sea Sword School, and it was the most important place for them to enter Chaotian. The godly swordsmen of West Ocean had destroyed the cloud platform. Did it mean something? Nanzheng didn't think about this because everyone's attention, including her, was attracted by another scene. She looked at a certain spot in the night sky and murmured with extremely complicated emotions, "Master." There was a rope hanging down from the sky, and a man was tied at the end. Shiwang's sun swayed gently in the sea breeze, like an inchworm falling from a tree branch. He knew that he was not far from death. Of course, it could also be said that he looked like a hanged ghost. Another name for the inchworm was hanged ghost. That sword light was very magnificent. The front part was very faint, so faint that it couldn't be seen. It was like a cool breeze. When the sword light cleaved the cloud platform, its tip silently slid across the night sky. The gentle breeze fell on Shiwang's Sunday. A mocking smile appeared on Shiwang's son's face. The next moment, his smile was cut in half, because his face had been cut in half. Next, his body was split into two. Shiwang's son was dead. The two halves of his body fell toward the surface of the sea, somewhat like a cloud platform that was separating, but more like a kite that had been broken. Even if he had a nascent soul and a sword ghost, they would all die under this extremely merciless sword light. Many others had died together with him. For example, Nanjing's loyalty to Bulo Lin and Tong Lu's pride. As such, neither he, who was standing on the sword in the night sky, nor she, who was trembling on the top of the mountain, could hear the loud voice echoing in the night sky. It was the voice of the godly swordsman of West Ocean. It seemed that he was saying that he was too negligent in disciplining his disciples, which led to the rise of Shi Wang's son and the disciples of the cloud platform. As a way to express his regret, he personally cleaned up the disciples of the sect. He ordered all the disciples of the Western Sea Sword School who came to reinforce the sect to return to the island, and not to stay here any longer. Having said that, the voice of the godly swordsman of West Ocean vanished, and so did the sword light. The disciples of the Western Sea Sword School who were riding their swords in midair eyed each other in bewilderment, feeling conflicted. In the end, they didn't dare disobey the order of the sect master, and were taken away by the two elders in the state of free travel by force. Tong Lu stayed behind. He stood on the flying sword, his face pale, looking a bit pitiful. The cloud platform had been completely separated, and more cliffs had collapsed. The formations were completely damaged, and no buildings were left intact. The disciples and caretakers of the West Ocean who stayed on the mountain cursed in despair and unwillingly, and some of them were crying. Since the formations were already damaged, they had no intention of staying on the cloud platform to await their doom. They leapt up on their swords. Soon, more than 100 sword lights left the cliffs one after another, illuminating the night sky. Seeing this scene and hearing the crying in the distance, Bu Qiuxiao sighed and said to Chen Yutian, "Try your best to protect those who have surrendered." Chen Yutian raised his right hand and said, "I hope they can calm down." Along with his gesture, hundreds of sword lights and magic treasure lights headed toward the cloud platform, occupying all the space in the area. Soon, they met with the hundreds of sword lights. Guinanshan was the principal disciple of Aoyama and had a high cultivation state, so he was in the front. Perhaps it was because the blue sea sword beneath his feet had been repaired, but the blue sword light it emitted was mixed with a faint golden color. All of a sudden, he saw a scene. His expression changed slightly, and he flew toward a certain spot. A few sword lights, flying out from the cloud platform, didn't try to escape. Instead, they flew toward the night sky where Tong Lu was. It was obvious that they wanted to harm him. Unfortunately, Tong Lu was also standing on his sword in a daze, as if he had gone crazy. He didn't notice the danger at all, and in Guinanshan's eyes, he wouldn't try to evade even if he had discovered the danger. Guinanshan flew to the front of Tong Lu as fast as he could and blocked those attacks. Those disciples of the West Ocean shot a few hateful glances at Tong Lu, but they didn't make any more attempts. They flew toward the distance, but they didn't get very far before they were surrounded by a dozen sword lights. The sounds of fighting, the clanging of swords, and the miserable screams filled the surrounding night sky. Standing on his sword, Guinanshan yelled at Tong Lu sternly, "Wake up! Tonight is already the best result we can get." Tong Lu's face was pale, and his hair, wet by the seawater, looked like withered willow leaves. He said, "That year, when we participated in the cultivation tournament, we ate roasted lamb, drank wine, and chatted for an entire night. In the end, I was the only fool. You people have been hiding it from me all this time, and it turns out that your target was our West Ocean." Guinanshan couldn't bear to see this, saying, "We hid it from you because you were a disciple of the West Ocean. But our target was never the West Ocean, but Bulo Lin." Tong Lu's voice trembled as he said, "What difference does it make? The West Ocean is Bulo Lin. Do you think that just because Master personally killed Martial Uncle and destroyed the cloud platform, the world will think that it was all Martial Uncle's fault and that it had nothing to do with the Western Sea Sword School?" After a moment of silence, Guinanshan said, "At least, that's what everyone thinks. But I don't think so. Tong Lu suddenly yelled angrily. Back then, we talked about many things, but the most important thing was not to deceive ourselves. Chapter 265. The battle had already begun. Gwen and Shan couldn't stay here any longer because of Tong Lu. But in fact, the battle had ended soon after it began. Battles between cultivation practitioners were always cruel, and quick. Life and death would be decided in a very short time. Compared to that, battles between mortals were like playing house. Hundreds of sword lights and magical treasures shuttled back and forth in the night sky. Then, sword lights rained down incessantly. Countless people died. Looking at the scene in the night sky, Nanjung suddenly felt that killing people in Bulo Lin was like playing house. Even though her cultivation state was much higher than that of some of the cultivation practitioners who participated in the battle today, the cloud platform was destroyed just like that. She turned around and headed down the cloud. She stumbled along the way and fell down the cliff many times. Even though she wasn't injured, she was still in pain. She knew that the world in the fog was equally dangerous, but she would rather face those dangers than stay on the cloud and watch those scenes. The world under the cloud was quiet. The sounds of fighting gradually faded away, but her eyes were filled with vigilance. She took down the greenstone zither from her back. Her slender fingers fell on the zither and plucked it noiselessly, emitting a bright sound. The invisible zither music spread in all directions, cutting through the dense fog. Clap, clap, clap. Several muffled sounds rang out one after another. The cavalrymen of the magic army, hiding in the darkness, knew that they had been discovered, so they charged at once. Their heavy iron hooves stomped on the ground, shaking the ground. Nanjung held the zither with one hand and quickly retreated, but she couldn't avoid several cavalrymen charging at her from the side. Accompanied by the muffled sounds of collision, she retreated to the bottom of a cliff, her face pale. The talisman paper cut open by the zither music was burning, emitting a faint glow that illuminated the surroundings. At least dozens of cavalrymen of the magic army appeared in her sight. They were so densely packed that they looked like a stone forest. Nanjung looked fearlessly at the leader of the cavalrymen at the front. That leader's face was hidden in his helmet, so only his eyes could be seen. His eyes were clean and young, but they were extremely callous. Nanjung looked down and saw that the leader of the cavalrymen carried a flying sword on his back. The flying sword was tightly bound and exuded a faint cold aura. It was obviously not ordinary. The leader of the cavalrymen took out his magic tool and looked at the portrait in the clear light. He then looked at Nanjung's face, which was illuminated by the clear light, and said, "You are the assassin of Bulo Lin. I will only give you 3 breaths' time to surrender." This cavalry commander was Gu Pan, who had led his subordinates to search for something during the day. On the way back, he didn't want to cause any trouble, but since he had encountered Bulo Lin's assassins, he couldn't just leave like that. Of course, Nanjung wouldn't surrender, nor did she intend to wait for her opponent to finish the count of 3 breaths. Her right hand reached for the barren vase at her waist. She hadn't learned the secret method of the Blood Demon Church, so she couldn't exert the full power of the barren bottle like Yu Huan. But it should be enough to stop these cavalrymen. Just as her fingers were about to touch the 4 barren vase, a gust of wind suddenly blew in front of the cliff. It was a misty spring night, but the wind was extremely cold. There was no warmth or moisture in the wind. Someone came to her side along with the wind and took down the greenstone zither on her back. Then he walked to the front of the cavalrymen. Nanjung was shocked. This person didn't have a strong aura, but why didn't she have any intention to resist when he took away the greenstone zither? It was a young girl in white. Her face was covered with a white veil. The white veil fluttered in the wind, revealing an ordinary face. Gu Pan said in a deep voice, "Tell me your name." The young girl in white had an extremely gentle aura. It was obvious that she had practiced the orthodox Xianmin cultivation method. She should be an orthodox practitioner. But because of her action, Gu Pan and the cavalrymen of the magic army were still vigilant. The young girl in white said, "You don't need to know who I am, but you should know my purpose." Gupan's face was covered by the armor, but his eyes that were exposed showed a dignified expression. Could it be that her target was the sword on his back? This was a top-secret operation. How could she know about it? The young girl in white knew that these cavalrymen of the magic army wouldn't exchange swords, so she didn't say anything more. She put her right hand on the surface of the zither and hooked it with her index finger. Buzz! The sound of the zither rang out. Nanjung could see clearly from behind that the young girl had never played the zither before. She was playing the zither with the technique. Even this technique seemed a little jerky, even clumsy, as if she was a beginner. But the sound of the zither was too clear. Even the cry of a young phoenix couldn't compare. And why did the sound of the zither carry such a strong, murderous aura? Those cavalrymen of the magic army were ordinary people, so they couldn't tell how terrifying the sound of the zither was. But their mounts could sense it clearly. They seemed extremely restless and uneasy. Ignoring the control of their masters, they turned around and fled into the distance. But it was too late. The sound of the zither that was full of murderous aura spread in all directions. It easily touched the talisman papers on the cavalrymen and their mounts, and then shredded them. Those talisman papers had just been ignited and didn't have the time to emit the last ray of light before they turned into scattered sparks like fireflies. The hundreds of cavalrymen fell from their mounts one after another before the fireflies completely disappeared. Their mounts also fell to the ground with a dense and heavy thud. Without the help of Yamatsai's talisman papers, the cavalrymen and war horses couldn't bear such heavy armors. They fell to the ground and kept struggling, but couldn't stand up. The young girl in white walked forward and took the flying sword from Gupan's back. Feeling the cold aura coming from the sword, she nodded in satisfaction. She didn't know what method she used, but the sword disappeared from her palm. She turned around and walked toward Nanjung. Gupan was an external disciple of the Zhongzhou state. Even though his cultivation state was ordinary, he was still a cultivation practitioner. He forcefully pushed away the mount on his legs and took off his heavy armor with difficulty, revealing his sweaty face and anxious eyes. He looked at the back of the young girl and yelled, "Who are you?" The young girl in white ignored him. She walked to Nanjung and asked, "Are you from the barbarian tribe?" Nanjung nodded nervously. Her aura wasn't strong, but her intuition told her that she would regret it if she attacked her. "Your name?" the young girl asked. "Nanjung," she answered. The young girl in white asked, "What's the relationship between you and Nanwang?" Judging from her aura, the young girl was obviously a cultivation practitioner of the orthodox cultivation sections. Maybe she knew Nanwang. Nanjung thought that if she told the truth, there might be a problem. Just as she was about to lie, she recalled the scenes in the cloud and suddenly felt tired. She said through gritted teeth, "She's a member of my tribe, but also my enemy." Having said that, the corners of her mouth showed a sneer of mockery, and she was ready to fight. She knew she wasn't a match for the young girl, but she couldn't die like this. Chapter 266. I forgot to tell you. Make up for it quickly. Tomorrow's chapter is also at 8 o'clock in the evening. Please tell each other about it. Nanjung was stunned. She was ready to die. It was like that year when her entire tribe was expelled from the Mountain of Ancestors and her family members were all killed. She didn't want to live anymore. Nanwang has been spoiled by those guys for many years and behaved impudently. No one in the barbarian tribes dares to offend the descendants of her clan. "You're really pitiful," the young woman in white said while looking at her. "Take out everything." Nanjung was stunned again. She didn't understand what the young woman meant until a moment later. Without any hesitation, she took off the barren vase and the diamond gloves and handed them to the young woman. After some thought, she took out a few bottles of magic pills she had accumulated in Bulow Lin. The young woman in white took the barren vase and the diamond gloves without taking the magic pills, saying, "Your zither is pretty good. Lend it to me for a few years." Nanjung thought that she couldn't refuse. Having said that, the young woman in white leapt up into the air, her dress fluttering in the wind as she flew away. Gupan looked in the direction where she disappeared, feeling a bit frustrated. Why didn't she kill him and all his subordinates easily if she could have done so? Nanjung had the same question, as well as something else. The background of this young woman in white was unknown, but she must be an important figure in the Orthodox cultivation circle. Tonight, the Orthodox cultivation circle was engaged in a fierce battle with Bulow Lin, but she didn't participate in the battle. Instead, she was fishing in troubled waters. What did she mean? The amulet paper slips, scattered like fireflies, gradually dimmed, and the world in the fog returned to darkness. Nanjung disappeared into the darkness after shooting a glance at Gupan. The southwest was truly desolate, especially in the treacherous mountains surrounding Izhou City, where few people could be found. Even a large temple like the Baodong Zen Temple didn't receive much incense, and few believers came to fulfill their vows. Between the morning bells and evening drums, it was quiet except for the sound of monks doing their homework. There was a vegetable garden a few miles to the west of the Baotong Zen Temple, which was responsible for the monks' daily necessities. In addition to the monks who grew vegetables, there were 3 more young guests. Looking at the green vegetables and tofu in the clay bowl, Hejan said with a hopeless expression, "If I keep eating like this, my face will turn green." Suzai glanced at him from the bed. In the vegetable garden of the Baotong Zen Temple, he was not the famous young master of the mysterious dark sect, but a patient. Hejan said, "I'm not laughing at you. You used to be a vegetable, but now you're just an eggplant. Although the color is a little lighter, you're still an eggplant." Tong Yin walked in from outside the room and put the medicine on the table. She said while looking at Su Zai, "The effect of the medicine is pretty good. The remaining poison will be eliminated in 5 days." Though there was a Zen in the Baodong Zen Temple, it was not a branch of the Zen sect and had nothing to do with the Guochang Temple. On the contrary, it was said that it was close to the Shuai nunnery. However, like the Guochang Temple, both the Baodong Zen Temple and the Guoqing Temple were highly skilled in medicine. Due to the hot and humid forests in the southwest land and the poisonous miasma, the Baodong Zen Temple was even more skilled in medicine than the Guochang Temple. Though Su Zai was poisoned severely, his life was saved by the treatment of the monks of the temple. In the beginning, the chief monk of the Baotong Zen Temple was unwilling to treat Su Zai because of his identity. He agreed reluctantly after Tong Yin begged him. However, he couldn't allow a devil man of the deviant sex to live in the temple, so he arranged for them to live in the vegetable garden and only asked Tong Yin to sneak into the temple to get the medicine every day. He had to make sure that nobody else knew about this. Otherwise, the reputation of the ancient temple, which had lasted for 1,000 years, would be ruined. The 3 of them had lived in the vegetable garden for many days. Hejan had finished the wine he brought with him a long time ago, and he was so hungry for the medicine that he almost couldn't stand it anymore. When he heard that Tong Yin would only need 5 days, his countenance finally looked better. Tong Yin walked to the window, continuing the unfinished game of Go. Su Zai finished drinking the medicine with the help of Hejan. He moved a little bit toward the window on the bed with some difficulty, looking at the Go board. The sunlight shone on the Go board through the window and reflected on his face. His green skin looked a bit lighter under the scorching sunlight. He really looked like a vegetable leaf. The sunlight also shone on Tong Yan's face. Her fair and tender skin looked like jade, and her eyebrows looked even lighter. She really looked like a child. It was because Hejan didn't want to continue playing Go, and Tong Yan's opponent was himself. He had been playing this game for 5 days. Su Zai had been watching the game for a long time as well. He knew how to play Go, and he considered himself a smart person, but he still couldn't understand the game until now. He didn't know how big the gap between him and Tong Yin was until now. In his eyes, there was only one reason why Tong Yin, whose skill of Go was far superior to anyone else in the world, was still playing Go so diligently and tirelessly every day. Su Zai asked, "Are you still not convinced that you lost to Jingjiu? You have to work hard to do anything." Not everyone is like that guy, who could get everything smoothly just by luck. Tong Yin didn't raise his head. His eyelashes cast a long shadow, which was as cold as his voice. Looking at Ijan, Suzai said sympathetically, "What a jealous life." Ijan was the mutual friend of the two of them, and also the only connection between them. In the cultivation circle, Ijan was not famous for his talent, though he was indeed talented. Nor was he known as the second in the world, which was a joke. What he was famous for was his luck. As a free-traveling disciple who had never learned the profound magic methods or the secret methods of the deviant sex, he was on par with figures like Suzai and Tong Yin. Was it because of his bearing and moral character? Of course not. It was because he had enough luck to make himself powerful enough. Ijan was peeling the green beans in salted water to make the strong tea. Hearing the conversation between the two, he walked to the window while dusting his hands. There's no need to be jealous. It's because I can't figure it out either. And I'm increasingly convinced that it's not a good thing. Many years ago, there was an ordinary nunnery outside a city. There was only one old nun in the nunnery, and there were 4 stone steps in front of the nunnery. One night, an abandoned baby was placed on the second stone step. In the early morning, the old nun found the abandoned baby and carried him inside. That abandoned baby was Ijan. The old nun recited the scripts every day. Ijan had been familiar with them since he was a child. Later, he began to practice with her, and he realized that those scripts were actually the methods of cultivation. As such, Ijan embarked on the path of cultivation. The time for the old nun was up. She closed her eyes and slept forever. Ijan left the nunnery and started to travel the world. He had thought that since the nunnery and the old nun were so ordinary, the method of cultivation must be ordinary as well. As such, he kept a low profile and didn't have any dealings with the cultivation practitioners. He even considered joining the Pure Heaven Bureau. One day, he found a magic treasure by the stream, and a young disciple of the sect of 3 bumped into him, who wanted to snatch the treasure. He didn't dare fight for it, and was about to offer it to the disciple with both hands. Unexpectedly, that disciple of the sect of 3 wanted to kill him to prevent him from divulging the secret. In desperation, he had no choice but to fight back. The disciple of the sect of 3 turned into a band of green smoke in front of him. It was then that he realized that everything was not ordinary, including the nunnery, the old nun, and the method of cultivation. What happened later proved that he was not an ordinary person, at least in terms of luck. He had many fortuitous encounters and picked up many magic treasures, including the bones of the flood dragon and the boxes of crystals. Whenever he needed something, he would find it. Turning misfortunes into blessings was a common occurrence for him. He grew up gradually and gained some fame in the cultivation circle, and became a disciple that many famous and large sects wanted to recruit. As Suzai said, how could he not be envious of such good luck? Why isn't it a good thing to have good luck? Suzai asked. Ijan shrugged and said, I don't want it to be like this. You should know that one can only toughen his will and temper his Tao heart after experiencing hardships and dangers, but I don't have such an opportunity. Suzai and Tong Yin eyed each other, saying nothing. Ijan continued, but I don't want to be like Lu Shui. It was quiet in the room for a while. Huh. Chapter 267. A 5-minute trailer of the TV series The Coming Night has been released. It's very good, and I recommend you all to watch it. I posted it on the WeChat account Mounty1118 today. Ijan understood what Tong Yin meant. It was the same as what Bai Zhao said to Jingjiao in Zhaoga City many years ago. The problem of Bulo Lin had existed for many years, and the orthodox cultivation sects hadn't solved it yet. The main problem was that they didn't have the motivation to solve it. The masters of various sects thought it was too troublesome and would disturb their cultivation. It was different this time. Tong Yin and the others overturned the table with the help of Lu Shui and exposed the evidence to the public. As such, the masters had to do something about it. In a sense, the battle outside Haizhou City the day before was forced by these young disciples to take action. Yet, Ijan didn't think it was meaningful, saying in a mocking tone, It can't be called a success if it hasn't succeeded yet. Tong Yin didn't raise her head, saying, the cloud platform was destroyed and the Western Sea Sword School wasn't allowed to enter Chaotian for 100 years. This is the success. Hejan said, back then, you people said that you wouldn't deceive yourselves and others like your predecessors did, and that you wouldn't compromise easily. What are you doing now? The Aoyama sect had invited two figures in the heavenly arrival state in the face of such a powerful force outside Haijo City, but the result was a compromise. The godly swordsman of West Ocean killed his young brother and came back, unaffected. Hejan was fully aware that it was a troublesome task to kill an important figure like the godly swordsman of West Ocean, but he still felt annoyed. He looked at Tong Yin and said, both your Zhongzhou and Aoyama are damn boring. Tong Yin still didn't raise her head, saying softly, an old man doesn't have much strength to begin with. Suzai thought it was interesting to hear their impolite comments about the masters, asking with a faint smile, who are you people? Hejan arched his eyebrows and asked, a secret organization made up of the young disciples of various sects? A faint smile appeared on Suzai's green face, which looked both funny and terrifying. Hejan spread his hands and said, I don't know if this description is accurate or not. One night, when I participated in the cultivation tournament for the first time, and it was also the last time everyone got together to drink and eat meat. We drank a little too much and talked a little too much. Then we talked about this inexplicably. Don't look at me. I just happened to be there and didn't participate in it deeply. At most, I'm an outsider. In fact, if it weren't for my good relationship with Tong Yin, I'm afraid they would have already killed me. Suzai asked, what do you really want to do then? Tong Yin was playing chess by the window and was very close to him, but he still asked Hejan. Hejan glanced at Tong Yin and said with a smile, what they want to do is, of course, to kill all of you. What kind of person was Suzai? He was the young master of the mysterious dark sect, a famous devil man of the deviant sects, and an enemy of the orthodox sections. Hearing what Hejan said, he laughed, saying, now that you've saved me, you won't kill me to keep my mouth shut. But why do you want me to know about it? Tong Yin put down another chess piece and lifted her head, saying softly to him, the mysterious dark sect is not yours anymore. You should turn over a new leaf. Suzai stopped smiling and asked calmly, what's in it for me? Tong Yin said, we can help you take back the mysterious dark sect. Suzai said, if I can take back the mysterious dark sect, why should I turn over a new leaf? Tong Yin said, because in that case, you can lead the entire mysterious dark sect to turn over a new leaf. After a moment of silence, Suzai said, you have great ambitions. Tong Yin said, it's not ambition, it's the structure. Suzai said, a smart person like you should know that the main difference between the orthodox and the deviant sects lies in the magic methods. The reason why the orthodox sects didn't tolerate the bloody demon church, the later mysterious dark sect, and the current deviant practitioners on the Cold Mountain was that their cultivation methods were evil, like swallowing the spirit blood, sacrificing the blood, and seizing the souls of the demonic embryos, in addition to their cruelty and killing the innocent. It's because you people have a problem with the spiritual source or your cultivation methods. That's why you people use this method to replace the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. All these problems can be solved. Tong Yin continued calmly. Lu Shui has practiced the secret method of the Bloody Demon Church to the 5th level, but he hasn't killed anyone. This is the proof. He might be a genius, and he must have had other fortunes in the Aoyama sect in the beginning. So this method can't be popularized. Suzai said, even if you and Jingjiu, two of the smartest people in the world, work together, they still can't solve this problem. Tong Yin said, I don't expect to solve all the problems of the deviant practitioners, but I think at least the problem of the mysterious dark sect can be solved. Suzai arched his eyebrows slightly, asking, how are you going to solve it? Tong Yin said softly, there are many spiritual sources at the bottom of the Cold Mountain, most of which are impure, but one or two of them are not bad. Suzai narrowed his eyes. The spiritual sources were the foundation of the cultivation sections. The Zhongzhou school and the Aoyama sect had the two best spiritual sources in Chaotian, and the rest of the sect had their own spiritual sources as well. The cultivation practitioners had searched Chaotian many times over the last tens of thousands of years, but it was impossible for a new spiritual source to exist. Even if they could find an unclaimed spiritual source, it would be snatched by the most powerful sections. There were many spiritual sources of fire nature at the bottom of the coal mountain, and the energy was indeed chaotic. The only spiritual source of high quality was 150 miles under the heavenly pond. There was no such thing as one or two of them. There was only one. The Kunlun sect was located there. What did Tong Yin mean by this? If it were someone else, they wouldn't dare think too deeply about it. But Suzai had to think deeply about it. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that this matter needed to be considered carefully. However, he was fully aware that even if he agreed to Tong Yan's request, it would only be a matter for a long time, or even a few hundred years. He said, "You people had better solve your own problems first." Hejan was baffled, asking, "What other problems do you have?" Suzai said with a faint smile, "Lu Shui has done a great deed this time, but he has killed Lo Huainan nonetheless. Isn't this a problem?" Hejan was taken aback, thinking that this was indeed a serious problem. Now that the Western Sea Sword School had retreated overseas, Bulo Lin would have to hide for a long time. However, if the problem of Lu Shui couldn't be solved, the Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school would have a conflict, and the situation in Chaotian would be even worse. That's something for Jing Jiao to worry about. You go cook a pot of green vegetable porridge. What Tong Yin said had a deeper meaning, but Su Zai and Hejan couldn't understand it. It was Hejan's job to cook the green vegetable porridge. Hejan was annoyed, asking, "Why don't you do it?" Tong Yin looked at the Go board and said, "I want to play chess." Hejan walked to the vegetable garden. Seeing the green color everywhere, he felt annoyed. He squatted down to pick the leaves of the lettuce, complaining, "It's better to use them to wrap meat." All of a sudden, his fingertips touched a hard object. The two of them in the room lifted their heads at the same time, looking at the outside of the window. The energy was so desolate that the sunlight seemed to grow dimmer. Hejan walked back to the room and put the object on the table, saying nothing. Su Zai and Tong Yin looked at it and found it was a sword. That chilling aura was emitted from this sword. Swords were seldom used in the Zhongzhou school. So was the mysterious dark sect. Yet, it didn't mean that they didn't have good judgment. This sword was definitely not an ordinary one. Suzai looked at Hejan and asked, "What's going on?" Hejan said, "I've just picked it up in the vegetable garden." Thinking of the matter of luck they had discussed earlier, Suzai remarked sentimentally, "I suddenly feel honored to be picked up by you from Ijo City." Chapter 268. Though I know you're not attacking me, I still feel uncomfortable hearing it. Suzai said to Tong Yin, "Inform the people of the Zen temple. This is the vegetable garden of his family." There was an unspoken rule in the cultivation circle that the ownership of the magic treasures without owners should be determined by their location. Suzai was a devil man of the deviant sects, so he didn't care about this rule in the past. But the situation was different now, and the Baodong Zen temple was treating his poison. "No need," Hejan said. "It's because I didn't pick it up." Suzai said, "You're lucky, so you can't argue with me." Hejan took out a vial and a boxing glove and put them on the table, asking, "Do you still think it's my luck?" Tong Yin shifted her gaze from the flying sword to the vial and the boxing glove. "It has nothing to do with luck," she said after observing for a while. The flying sword, the vial, and the boxing glove were all new, indicating that they hadn't been buried for a long time. Since Hejan could find them so easily, it meant that they had been buried not too long ago. It was evident that these treasures were not the treasures of the monks of the previous generation at the Baotong Zen temple, and they weren't treasures at all. There was only one explanation. Someone had intentionally placed them in the vegetable garden for Hejan to pick up. Tong Yin walked back to the window and looked at the vegetable garden, remaining silent. It was unclear what she was thinking. Lying on the bed, Su Zai saw the vial and the boxing glove on the table, asking with arched eyebrows, "Are you Bu Huan and Tu Chio both dead?" Hejan shot him a glance and asked, "Do you know about these things?" Su Zai told him about the origins of Yu Bu Huan and Tu Chio's sex, saying, "If my information is correct, they should have joined Bulo Lin a long time ago." The expression on Hejan's face changed slightly, and he said, "It has something to do with what happened yesterday." Tong Yin didn't turn around, saying, "Like I said, this sword is a big trouble." Hejan and Su Zai fixed their gazes on the sword. The Baron vase and the diamond boxing glove were the famous magic treasures of the deviant practitioners on the Cold Mountain. But it was evident that this sword was of a much higher state than the two. If these three magic treasures were the remnants of the destruction of Bulo Lin by the orthodox cultivation sects last night, why would they appear in the vegetable garden of the Baotong Zen Temple and be discovered by Hejan so easily? As I said earlier, I feel that my luck is not a good thing. Besides the reason, I don't think it's luck. Hejan said, "It's because it's impossible for such a lucky person to exist in this world. Such a person should have been struck to death by the heavenly thunder a long time ago." Su Zai said, "Though I've thought so all these years, how can you explain what has happened in the last few years?" Hejan said, "I feel that someone is watching me in secret, and he will provide me with whatever I need, just like what happened today." Su Zai laughed and said, "It sounds quite cheerful." Hejan forced a smile and said, "But you don't know who that person is, and you don't know what he wants to do. What if one day someone comes out and says that everything I have is because of him, and he wants to take back everything he has given me, or ask me to do something that I can't do? That's why I've been running away all these years. I refuse to participate in the law tournament anymore, and I don't want to have any dealings with those sections. I've been traveling around every day because I'm afraid that one day that person will suddenly appear before me." Tong Yin turned around, looked at him, and said, "I think you think too much." Hejan was stunned and asked why. Tong Yin said, "No schemer would be so stupid. In addition, the magic treasures you picked up are very good. Although your talent is good, it is not too outstanding." Hejan said, "I don't understand. Be more direct." Tong Yin said, "You're not worth it." Hejan was somewhat annoyed, exclaiming, "Then, how do you explain what has happened to me over the years? Couldn't a senior master have taken a liking to my talent and trained me in secret?" Tong Yin said, "Unless it was your real mother." Hejan waved his hand, not wanting to talk to him anymore. Tong Yin added, "Judging from the benefits you have obtained over the years, your real mother must be an important figure, like my master." Hejan thought it was reasonable. He pointed at the things on the table and asked, "What about these?" Su Zai said while leaning against the headboard, "If you don't mind, you can share them with us." Tong Yin said, "I want the boxing gloves." Hejan said mockingly, "You have a weak body, so these are suitable for you. But what about you?" Su Zai said, "The Baron bottle is a treasure left by the Bloody Demon Church. It's very evil, and you can't use it. So it's mine. Since you are so polite, I won't hold back then." Hejan put away the sword and started to cook the porridge. The porridge was gurgling in the bowl. It would take a long time for it to be ready. Hejan took out the flying sword and sat by the window, looking at it under the sunlight for a long time. "What is your name?" he asked. "Why are you here?" The flying sword couldn't answer his question, no matter how intelligent it was. It was Tong Yin who answered the question. "It's called the First Child Sword," he said softly while looking at the chessboard. "It was delivered to your hands by someone." Hejan was somewhat surprised, asking, "Do you trust my judgment?" "Of course, there's something fishy about it," Tong Yin said. Hejan said, "But you were mocking me just now." "I wasn't mocking you." "If your conjecture is correct, I can only come up with my conjecture." Tong Yin raised his head and said to him, "That person is your real mother, an important figure in the cultivation world." Hejan shrugged, not knowing what to say. Tong Yin said, "Many people died on the cloud platform last night, and many magic treasures were lost. Let's wait and see what else your real mother will bring to you." Hejan said solemnly, "I hope she will bring me a jar of fermented bean curd, savory and spicy. Suzai said while lying on the bed, "That's possible. I don't understand why the monks consider fermented bean curd to be meat when there's no meat in it." That night, it seemed that Jean's real mother had indeed brought something to them, but they didn't know whether it was a treasure or not. Judging from its preciousness, it should be a treasure, but it was a person. Looking at Tong Lu lying unconscious in the vegetable field, Jean was at a loss. He looked at Tong Yin and shrugged, asking, "What's going on?" The Institute of White Deer had been burning for a day and a night. The courtyard that had been filled with the sound of reading had turned into ruins, and the air was filled with a burning smell. Even the cliffs had been scorched black. Standing in front of the ruins of the Institute, Pei Baifa lowered his head and closed his eyes, sensing the remaining temperature, his face expressionless. An elder of the No Mercy sect reported, "All the corpses have been identified. Tian Jingrun is not among them." Pei Baifa said in a deep voice, "I'll be away for a while. You people go back and seal off Longevity Mountain." The group of the No Mercy sect was startled. Due to the suppression of the Western Sea Sword School, the status of a No Mercy sect in the cultivation circle had been declining, and even their ranking at the Plum meeting had dropped. Now that the sect master had come out from behind closed doors, Shiwang's son had been killed, the cloud platform had been destroyed, and the Western Sea Sword School had been expelled from Chaotian, it was a good opportunity for the No Mercy sect to develop. Why did they seal off the mountain? No matter how puzzled they were, nobody dared disobey the sect master's order. Similarly, nobody dared ask the reason or where they were going. They only asked when they would return. The elder asked, "When will Big Brother return?" Pei Baifa said, "You people will know when he returns." Having said that, he leapt up on his sword and flew toward the west. Seeing the sword light disappearing into the twilight, the group of the No Mercy sect bowed to see him off, knowing that the sect master was going to do something shocking in the world. Chapter 269. As the morning sunlight shone down, the pagoda forest in the deep end of the Baotong Zen temple shone like the white gems, and the vegetable garden at the foot of the mountain was as quiet as ever. Tong Lu opened his eyes and woke up. Looking at the dark walls and smelling the vegetable oil in the air, he felt bewildered. It took him some time to come back to his senses. He had a rough idea of the current situation, and he sat up with difficulty. He suddenly found a strange person sitting in front of him, with a green face and a cold expression in his eyes. The strange person was none other than Suzai. Suzai and Tong Lu sat at the two ends of the bed, staring at each other in silence. The atmosphere was rather eerie. Tong Lu's face suddenly turned pale. He was about to call out his flying sword to kill the other person, but he failed. Then, he remembered that his flying sword had been broken last night. "Do you know me?" Suzai sensed his lethal intent. Tong Lu said, "You two are the only people in all of Chaotian who can identify you based on your faces." Suzai was born from the demon fetus and had a green face after the corpse poison entered his body, so it was easy to identify him. But who was the other person? "The other person is Jingjio." Hejan walked in from outside the room. "What?" Suzai asked. Hejan raised his hand and brushed it over his face, saying, "It's because he is very good-looking. Haven't you heard of him?" Suzai was taken aback. He had heard the rumors about Jingjio, but he thought it was exaggerated. It turned out that the rumors were true. Hejan said to Tong Lu, "You two don't fight. There's only one bed in the room for you two patients. What if the bed collapses?" Tong Lu looked at him and asked, "Do you want to explain the current situation?" Hejan shrugged, saying, "Don't ask me. I don't know how you came here. The situation is so eerie." He felt that he was innocent, wondering how many times he had shrugged in the last 2 days. "What did you remember before you passed out?" A cold and arrogant voice rang out. The three of them looked in the direction of the voice and found that Tong Yin had been sitting by the window, playing chess. From the beginning to the end, Tong Yin did not speak, did not make a sound, and actually made people forget his existence. Tong Lu was shocked. He hadn't expected that Tong Yin would also be here. Then, he started to ponder over his question. The night before, there was chaos outside Haijo City. Sword light flashed back and forth, and danger was everywhere. At that time, he was a little absent-minded and almost got injured a few times, but he dodged completely based on instinct. Until a certain moment, not knowing whether it was because of his injuries acting up or because he was short of breath, his vision darkened and he fainted. Before he lost consciousness, he only remembered that the night sky was filled with sword lights, like a rainstorm. Then, a real rainstorm fell outside Haijo City. The cracked cloud platform fell towards the sea in the heavy rain. Tong Lu was silent for a very long time. He looked at Tong Yin and said, "So you know all these things?" Tong Yin said, "I've always suspected the West Ocean. It was my suggestion to start from now on." Tong Lu was very angry. He stared into his eyes and asked, "So you all hid this from me?" He had already raised this question in front of Gua Nanshan the night before. Gua Nanshan said that they had to hide it from him because he was a disciple of the West Ocean. Moreover, they wanted to deal with Bulo Lin, not the Western Sea Sword School. Tong Yin and Gua Nanshan had different temperaments, so their answers were naturally different. They were more direct and sharp. It was just like how his style of chess had changed in the last few years. The Western Sea Sword School is Bulo Lin. If you were me, would you say that? Hearing this, Tong Lu was silent for a very long time. He looked at Yijan and asked in a low voice, "Where is this place?" Yijan spread out his hand again and said, "This is the Baotong Zen Temple, which only has vegetables, tofu, and brown rice. It doesn't even have spicy fermented bean curd." Feeling surprised, Tong Lu asked, "What are you doing here?" Yijan pointed to Su Zai on the other side of the bed and said, "He was poisoned by an assassin of Bulo Lin and Ijo. This is the only place that can cure him." Tong Lu sneered. "Can I take it that you have been colluding with this devil man of the deviant sect?" The deviant sects had declined in the last several hundred years, and those old monsters had disappeared. The young master of the mysterious dark sect could be said to be the most famous deviant cultivator. Suzai looked at him and said mockingly, "Your status is similar to mine. You'd better get used to it." Tong Yin asked Tong Lu, "Who threw you here?" Yijan was somewhat nervous. If Tong Lu could remember some things, he might be able to find an answer to the question that had troubled him for many years. Tong Lu shook his head. He truly couldn't remember what had happened in the inn that night. Tong Yin looked at Yijan and said, "Don't be hasty. They have been sending things here in a hurry. They should be here soon." A voice broke out outside the room. "I've always thought that chess, zither, calligraphy, and painting are boring, but it looks like playing chess can indeed make one smarter." A young woman in white walked into the room. She didn't wear a veil that day. Her seemingly ordinary face looked very bright under the morning sunlight. Yijan and Tong Lu were both startled, and so was Tong Yin. Young sister Guodong. Hearing this name, the expression in Su Zai's eyes froze a bit. It turned out that the young woman in white was Guodong, the daughter of Shui Yu Nunnery. It was said that she was the personal disciple of Lien Sanyue. Why did she appear at the Baodong Zen Temple? What did she have to do with the matter they were discussing? Guodong asked. "Are you people used to living here?" Tong Yin didn't answer this question. All she did was look at Guodong in silence, as if she wanted to see through her ordinary face and find out what was hidden under it. Yijan asked with a bewildered expression, "Why are you here?" Guodong said, "The Baotong Zen Temple and our Shui Yu Nunnery are of the same lineage." Tong Yin suddenly said, "And this place is close to Ijo City. If he wants to cure the poison, he will definitely come here." Guodong said, "You're really smart. I didn't misjudge you." Tong Yin arched her eyebrows slightly. Her tone sounded a bit condescending, like a senior commenting on a junior. In the past, apart from his two masters, Jing Jiao was the only one who had spoken to him in such a tone. Su Zai furrowed his eyebrows even deeper. In the past, if he encountered the disciples of the orthodox sects, they would try to kill him without hesitation, like what Tong Lu had done earlier, or he would kill them. After the young woman in white entered the room, she didn't even take a look at him. This kind of disregard was more uncomfortable than hostility. Yijan came back to his senses and asked, "What are you doing here?" Guidong said calmly. Haven't you people been guessing who that person is? It became exceedingly quiet in the room. When a morning sunlight shone on the Go board, it seemed to produce a sound. Su Zai sneered. You've only cultivated for a little more than 10 years. How could you be the person Yijan is looking for? He was born with a demonic embryo, so he was very sensitive to the energy of the cultivation practitioners. His ability to judge the cultivation state and age of a cultivation practitioner was marvelous. Yijan was well aware of the ability of this friend of his, thinking that since young Sister Guidong was still very young, it was impossible for her to be his biological mother. She was at most a stepmother. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.